Chapter 500. The seal-suppressing LV-1Ho had already been broken, and the whole place looked like it was about to collapse. Lu Fengxian held the unparalleled divine weapon and walked towards Chu Xiu with a slightly confused look on his face. However, Chu Xiu quietly took a step back and condensed the aura around him to the extreme. Chu Xiu couldn't be blamed for being nervous. In fact, when they saw Lu Fengxian move, everyone present also subconsciously took a step back. Although they had watched LV-1Ho's true soul shatter with their own eyes, there were too many incredible things that could happen at LV-1Ho's level. Only God knew if Lu Fengxian would be possessed or not. Lu Fengxian also reacted at this time. He smiled bitterly and said, "Brother Chu, I'm really fine. LV-1Ho's true soul has completely shattered." Chu Xiu quietly used the heaven sun gazing at air technique to check again. After finding no abnormalities, he said, "Did you get LV-1Ho's inheritance?" Lu Fengxian nodded and said, "You can say that, but I think LV-1Ho himself didn't want to give me the inheritance. Moreover, I also got some vague memories, but I can't remember them." As soon as this statement came out, everyone present, including Fang Qishao and Ing Bailu, looked at Lu Fengxian with strange eyes. This was a great opportunity. That was the inheritance of the ancient demon lord LV-1Ho, and now Lu Fengxian was holding the unparalleled divine weapon that belonged to LV-1Ho. It could be said that all the benefits this time were in the hands of Lu Fengxian. Even Fang Qishao and Ing Bailu were a little jealous of Lu Fengxian's luck. In fact, among those who entered the place where LV-1Ho's seal was suppressed this time, Lu Fengxian didn't stand out at all, excluding Dong Qikuan and the other two martial Dao grandmasters. The most outstanding ones were Chu Xiu, who had killed a martial Dao grandmaster, and Ing Bailu, who had displayed an unparalleled cultivation base. In the end, neither of them managed to obtain the inheritance. Everything was taken by Lu Fengxian. It had to be said that luck was sometimes more important than strength. Puzzled, Chu Xiu pointed at the jade pendant on Lu Fengxian's chest and asked, "What is this?" Everyone could see that without this jade pendant, it was estimated that Lu Fengxian would have been possessed by Lu-1Ho. Because of this jade pendant, Lu Fengxian was able to reverse the situation. LV Fengxian took out the jade pendant. However, there was already a crack on the jade pendant. Touching the crack on the jade pendant, Lu Fengxian's expression was a little distressed. "When I was young, my mother asked for this jade pendant from a temple on a mountain for me. It was blessed by an eminent monk. When I was young, I was a little weak and sickly, so my mother asked me to wear this jade pendant at all times, saying that it could keep me safe for a lifetime." Chu Xiu was a little speechless. Lu Fengxian was born with divine strength. Even if he didn't cultivate a body-tempering cultivation method, his strength was not inferior to a martial artist who cultivated a body-tempering cultivation method. But he was actually weak and sickly when he was young. However, what surprised Chu Xiu even more was the origin of this jade pendant. He asked curiously, "Brother Lu, who was the eminent monk who gave you this jade pendant? You can't really think that ordinary things can resist Lu-1Ho's true spirit, right?" Lu Fengxian was a person with luck, Chu Xiu was very sure, so he was also surprised that the person who gave Lu Fengxian this jade pendant should be a reclusive eminent monk, at least at the level of Master Tam Yuan. However, Lu Fengxian shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "That eminent monk is an eminent monk in the eyes of ordinary people, but in fact, he doesn't know martial arts. The last time I went back to the northern Yen to visit my relatives, I wanted to see this master, but the temple was already abandoned. I asked the villagers around, and they said that the master was old, and the acolytes that he took in were tired of the lack of pilgrims in the temple, and that it was too poor, so they went to a big temple. The master couldn't hold on for long, and passed away several years ago." Chu Xiu was speechless. Since the master was gone, he wouldn't be able to find anything. However, it was obvious that this jade pendant was a treasure. It couldn't guarantee Lu Fengxian's safety for a lifetime, but it could guarantee his safety for a while, just like now. Looking at the crumbling hall around him, Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "Brother Lu, let's go. This place is about to collapse." LV Fengxian nodded. The others still wanted to search around to see if there were any treasures, but seeing that they couldn't hold on for much longer, they could only grit their teeth, turn around, and run out. Meanwhile, in the outside world, Dong Qikuan and Su Tingyi had ugly expressions on their faces. They were forced to come out, and it could be said that their trip was in vain. At this time, the patriarch of the Dong family also arrived with the other members of the Dong family, and they were in a cautious and defensive posture. They had found such a large tomb during the mountain opening ceremony. Of course, not all the martial artists of the Dong family had entered it, but some of them had returned to the Dong family to inform the patriarch. For relics like this, the Dong family would usually leave half of its people outside to provide support, in order to prevent any unforeseen events from happening and everyone being caught in one fell swoop. The people brought by the patriarch of the Dong family were to provide support outside. At this time, the patriarch of the Dong family's expression was also a little ugly. He snorted coldly and said, "Qikuan, so many disciples of our Dong family were there. As the patriarch, you abandoned so many disciples and fled alone. Is this your responsibility as the patriarch of the Dong family?" Dong Qikuan's face was a little red. At that time, he really didn't think so much, and he only thought about saving his own life. However, now that the patriarch of the Dong family pointed out in front of so many people, Dong Qikuan still felt a little embarrassed. Dong Qikuan couldn't help but explain, "Patriarch, it's not that I don't want to save my disciples, but you didn't see that scene. That was the true spirit of the ancient demon god LV Wenho. Once it unleashed its power, let alone a martial Dao Grand Master, I guess even a true fire spirit refinement realm expert wouldn't be able to withstand it. If I escaped first, I could still save some strength. If I was in there, I'm afraid even I would have to die there." The best way to cover up one's weakness was to exaggerate the enemy's strength, and this was what Dong Qikuan was doing now. In fact, at that time, Dong Qikuan was far from being unable to withstand it, but he was really scared, and subconsciously chose to escape first. However, the patriarch of the Dong family was also a shrewd person, and he knew what Dong Qikuan was thinking at a glance. He couldn't help but snort coldly and said, "Even a true fire spirit refinement realm expert couldn't withstand it? You even fought with a true fire spirit refinement realm expert? Why didn't I know?" Just when Dong Qikuan was about to say something, he saw that many martial artists had already escaped from the big tomb, and many of them were members of the Dong family, which made Dong Qikuan immediately let out a sigh of relief. He quickly called a martial artist over and asked, "What's the situation inside?" The martial artist of the Dong family panted and immediately told him what had happened, but after listening to it, the patriarch of the Dong family was so angry that his face turned red. "Trash! Dong Qikuan, is this how you act as the patriarch? You're the first to escape when you encounter a crisis, but in the end, you leave the opportunity to others." In the eyes of the patriarch of the Dong family, if Dong Qikuan didn't go out, there was no reason why a junior could obtain LV Wenho's inheritance, but Dong Qikuan, a martial Dao Grand Master, couldn't. Dong Qikuan's face turned red, but he still lowered his head and said in a deep voice, "Patriarch, please calm down. It's not impossible. Patriarch, don't forget that this is the opening ceremony of the Dong family, and everything found belongs to the Dong family, including LV Wenho's inheritance and the divine weapon Peerless Halberd." As soon as they heard Dong Qikuan's words, the surrounding martial artists of the Dong family and Su Tingyi immediately understood what he meant. Dong Qikuan was going to ignore the rules and seize the inheritance that belonged to Lu Fengxian. Logically speaking, the rules of the mountain opening ceremony was that so long as it was something that could be taken away, then the person who obtained it could take it away. If one had to hand over the things one found, then who would participate in the mountain opening ceremony? Go and play by yourselves. Therefore, what Dong Qikuan was doing now was disregarding the rules. Su Tingyi, who was standing aside, didn't say anything. He was an outsider, and there were so many people of the Dong family here, so he definitely couldn't get any benefits, so he could only be a spectator with peace of mind. At this time, the patriarch of the Dong family frowned and said, "But the rules of the opening ceremony." Dong Chikuan sneered and said, "Patriarch, the rules are dead, but people are alive. Those are the ancient demonic god LV Wenho's cultivation method and peerless 9th revolution divine weapon. It is worth it to break the rules for these things, and bear some infamy, but it is also worth it." The patriarch of the Dong family was a martial artist of the older generation who adhered to the old rules, and he still wanted to save some face, so he was somewhat reluctant to break the rules. But at this time, Dong Chikuan encouraged, "Patriarch, that is LV Wenho's inheritance cultivation method. Not to mention the peerless divine weapon, LV Wenho's inheritance cultivation method must be above the 9th revolution." The words 9th revolution cultivation method tilted the balance in the patriarch's heart, because the Dong family didn't have a 9th revolution cultivation method. The cultivation methods in the Jianghu, from the 1st revolution to the 9th revolution, were actually divided into 3 grades. Generally, the 1st revolution to the 3rd revolution were the ordinary ones, and most of the rogue martial artists and some small sects and families had them. The 4th revolution to the 6th revolution were already considered good cultivation methods, and the martial artists without a bit of luck and background couldn't get them. As for the 7th revolution to the 9th revolution level cultivation methods, generally only people with profound luck and inheritance, and some big forces could get their hands on them. As for the peerless cultivation methods and supreme cultivation methods, except for some people with great luck and luck, only forces at the level of the Great Light Temple were qualified to have them. The strength of the Dong family was not weak, but the Dong family's strongest internal cultivation method was only at the 8th revolution level, which was not weak, but also not strong. If they could get the demonic god LV Wenho's cultivation method inheritance, it would be a 9th revolution level existence. People like Ng Bailu and Fang Qi Shao didn't care, because they could choose more than one 9th revolution cultivation method. But for the Dong family, even if they gave up their current cultivation method and changed to LV Wenho's cultivation method, it was worth it. Chapter 501. Just as Dong Chikuan had said, rules were dead, but people were alive. With the inheritance of LV Wenho in front of him, even the patriarch of the Dong family was tempted. In fact, the patriarch of the Dong family was not young anymore. Although he still had a long lifespan, his qi and blood were already declining. At this time, he couldn't enter the true fire spirit refining realm even if he cultivated a peerless divine skill, let alone the 9 revolutions cultivation method. Therefore, the patriarch of the Dong family wholeheartedly considered the Dong family. In this generation, the Dong family was neither high nor low among the 9 great families. It was an awkward position. Moreover, there was no successor among the Dong family's descendants. Not to mention an excellent disciple like Ng Bailu, they couldn't even enter the top 50 of the Longhu list. If they could obtain LV Wenho's inheritance, the strength of the next generation of the Dong family would definitely improve greatly. One day, they might be able to rank among the top of the 9 great families. They might even be able to compete with the Xianxia Ying family. Thinking of this, the patriarch of the Dong family became eager. He nodded and said, "All right, we'll do as you say." However, at this time, a martial artist of the Dong family said hesitantly, Patriarch, although Lu Fengxian is a rogue cultivator, she's not simple. He's very close friends with Chu Xiu of the Guanzhong torture room. He's also good friends with Xia Shaolu of the World Alliance. I heard that Lu Fengxian was even appreciated by Qinqing Di. Qinqing Di once invited Lu Fengxian to join the World Alliance, but Lu Fengxian refused. If we forcibly snatch Lu Fengxian's opportunity, won't we get into trouble? Dong Chikuan and the patriarch of the Dong family looked at each other. They really didn't know about this. They were all martial artists of the older generation. Naturally, they wouldn't care about what happened in the Jianghu of the younger generation. But Dong Qikuan shook his head and said with a cold smile, "No matter, this is West Chu, not the Guanzhong torture room. The one we are moving against is not Chu Xiu, so we don't need to worry about the Guanzhong torture room. The same goes for the Heaven Alliance. If Lu Fengxian is a member of the Heaven Alliance, the Dong clan will naturally give face to Qinqing Di. However, Lu Fengxian had nothing to do with the Heaven Alliance. He was just a good friend of Qinqing Di's disciple. He wasn't worth such a big deal. Although Qinqing Di is overbearing, he still has to abide by the rules and be reasonable. There's no need to care about the Heaven Alliance either." Seeing that the patriarch was confident, the disciple of the Dong clan didn't say anything else. After all, as long as he obtained the cultivation technique, he would be qualified to cultivate it as a disciple of the Dong clan. At this time, Chu Xiu, Lu Fengxian, and the others had also escaped from the big tomb. Not long after they left, the whole tomb began to collapse. Seeing this scene, Chu Xiu couldn't help but shake his head. In fact, everyone had neglected the fact that this big tomb was originally a treasure. Back then, this big tomb was built to suppress Marquis Lv Wenho. It should have been the joint effort of Taoism and Buddhism. The inside of this big tomb was sealed by double formations of Taoism and Buddhism, and all of them were passed down from ancient times. If they could make a copy of it, it would be very worthwhile to study it. However, it was too late now. The big tomb had collapsed, and the people who came later could only find some scattered runes, which were not very useful. After leaving the big tomb, Chu Xiu and Lu Fengxian were ready to leave and recuperate for a period of time. Chu Xiu was ready to recover his strength. He had just killed a martial Dao Grand Master, and he was a little exhausted. He had hurt some of his vitality, so he needed to recuperate in time. As for Lu Fengxian, he needed to find a place to enter seclusion to break through to the oneness of heaven and man realm. That's right, he wanted to break through to the oneness of heaven and man realm. This time, Lu Fengxian benefited not only from Marquis Lv Wenho's inheritance, but also from Marquis Lv Wenho's true spirit fragment into Lu Fengxian's body, which also gave Lu Fengxian an extremely majestic power. Now, Lu Fengxian had not refined this power, but he could already feel that he was at the threshold of the oneness of heaven and man realm. He only needed to enter seclusion to refine it. Even Chu Xiu had to admit that Lu Fengxian's creation was really incomparable. Along the way, Chu Xiu had also seized a lot of opportunities, but he had also fought and killed more. After going through so many twists and turns, Chu Xiu had obtained his current realm and strength. Although Lu Fengxian had also encountered a lot of things, it was not as many as Chu Xiu. However, he had caught up so quickly, and this speed even made Chu Xiu feel a little jealous. Sure enough, luck was something that could not be explained. Just as Chu Xiu and Lu Fengxian were about to leave, the Dong family's martial artists had already surrounded them. The martial artists present were suddenly stunned, and they did not know what the Dong family wanted. Chu Xiu frowned, and suddenly felt that something was wrong. Dong Qikuan stood out and said with a smile, "My Dong family is very grateful that everyone has come to participate in my opening mountain ceremony. However, according to the rules, some things belong to my Dong family, so if you have taken something from my Dong family, please hand it over." As soon as these words came out, everyone present was stunned, and then they subconsciously looked at Lu Fengxian, and immediately retreated. In the big tomb that suppressed Marquis Lv Wenho, they did not obtain any benefits at all. Even if they were asked to hand it over, they would not be able to. The only one who had obtained benefits was Lu Fengxian. Lu Fengxian frowned, but did not say anything. At this time, Dong Qikuan looked at Lu Fengxian with a fake smile, and said, "Little friend Lu, if you have taken something, then hand it over. Do you really want me to say it by name?" Lu Fengxian's expression did not change, and she said, "Dong family head, what do you mean? According to the rules of the opening mountain ceremony, everything that can be taken away, and only the things that can't be taken away will belong to the Dong family. Dong Qikuan said indifferently, "Oh, that's right. Since it's like this, then I will leave little friend Lu here, and then you will not be able to take it away, right?" As soon as these words came out, the expressions of everyone present changed, and it seemed that Dong Qikuan was prepared to completely break the rules and act shamelessly. Everyone present looked at Lu Fengxian with a trace of sympathy. The strength of this Lu Fengxian's karmic luck really made them envious. Among so many people, only she had obtained the inheritance of the demonic god Lv Wenho. But no matter how strong one's karmic luck was, it was not stronger than one's fist. At present, the Dong family's fist was stronger, and it was obvious that they wanted to seize Lv Wenho's inheritance. What could Lu Fengxian do? At the level of the Dong family, it was fine for them to abide by the rules, but even if they broke the rules and seized the inheritance of the younger generation, they would at most be scolded, and so what? In any case, they would not be hurt. At the side, Chu Xiu said coldly, "Dong family head, you have broken the rules of the mountain opening ceremony. Aren't you afraid of being despised by the other martial arts forces of West Chu?" Dong Qikuan glanced at Chu Xiu, and said indifferently, "Despised? Our Dong family has been in the martial world for a long time, when have we ever been afraid of being scolded? Chu Xiu, I know you are good friends with Lu Fengxian, but you'd better not get involved in this matter. Now, the wisest choice for you is to persuade your friend to hand over Lv Wenho's inheritance and the unparalleled divine weapon, and you can leave safely. Otherwise, you can leave, but I'm afraid Lu Fengxian will have to stay in our Dong family as a guest for a while." Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows. It seemed that the reputation of the Guanzhong torture room was not very famous in the martial world, and the Dong family did not have the slightest fear of it. Of course, Chu Xiu soon found out that the Dong family was now blinded by greed, and the Guanzhong torture room was not the only thing they were not afraid of. The Dong family had gone too far in this matter. Even Fang Qishao, who had not planned to speak up before, could not help but speak up, "Hey, don't you think your Dong family is a little too unreasonable? If you do this, who will help your Dong family the next time they hold the mountain opening ceremony?" Dong Qikuan glanced at Fang Qishao, and said indifferently, "So it turns out to be young Master Fang of Sword King City. Young Master Fang, you don't need to worry about my Dong family's matters. This matter has nothing to do with Sword King City." It was true that Sword King City was stronger than his Dong family. Normally, when Fang Qishao came, the Dong family would definitely give him face and serve him well. But now, it was fine if Fang Qishao did not speak up. Even if Fang Qishao spoke up now, the Dong family would not give him face. Seventh young Master Fang furrowed his brows as a rare gloomy look appeared in his eyes. In fact, Fang Qishao was different from other disciples who always talked about Sword King City. He rarely used his sect to oppress others, but today was the first time someone did not give him face and openly looked down on Sword King City. Ying Bailu did not speak, he just watched silently. The Ying clan was one of the 9 great families, just like the Dong family. Although Ying Bailu disapproved of the Dong family's behavior, he would not speak up to stop them. Yan Fian wanted to speak up for Lu Fengxian. After all, Lu Fengxian saved her just now. But when she saw what happened to Fang Qishao, she immediately swallowed her words. The Dong family was determined to snatch Lu Fengxian's inheritance. They did not even give face to Sword King City, let alone the Yunu Palace. After all, the Yunu Palace's strength was not comparable to Sword King City, and it was not even comparable to the Dong family itself. Chu Xiu raised the heavenly demon dance in his hand and said indifferently, "Humans need face, trees need bark. I didn't expect the Dong family to be so shameless this time. Dong Qikuan, I'll give you face. You're a martial Dao Grandmaster, the patriarch of the Dong family. If I don't want to give you face, it's not like I haven't killed martial Dao Grandmasters before." Lu Fengxian also raised the unparalleled divine weapon in her hand. She did not say anything, but the black glass dragon on the unparalleled divine weapon let out a deep roar. In an instant, a ferocious aura burst out. The aura even made Dong Qikuan's expression change. Only then did Dong Qikuan realize that he should not have treated Chu Xiu as an ordinary unity of heaven and man cultivator. Although no one knew how Chu Xiu killed Xiao Liandong, it was Chu Xiu's real battle record. If he insisted on interfering in this matter, his deterrence would not be inferior to a real martial Dao grandmaster. Chapter 502. Chu Xiu's words were arrogant to others. Who did he think he was to kill a martial Dao master just like that? However, it was the truth when it came to Chu Xiu, who had just killed a martial Dao master. No one would take Chu Xiu's words as a joke. Besides Chu Xiu, Halberd and Wushuang had already acknowledged Lu Fengxian as their master. Even Dong Qikuan felt a little pressured when he sensed Halberd's aura. Although Lu Fengxian was only at the 5 Qis collecting in origin stage, he had just obtained Marquis Lu Wenho's inheritance after all. Dong Qikuan was not sure if he could unleash the power of the 9 transformation divine weapon. However, Dong Qikuan had already said it. If he tried to step aside now, he would lose all his face. Therefore, Dong Qikuan directly said to Su Ting, "Brother Su, help me suppress these 2 junior martial artists. Haven't you always wanted to borrow my Dong family's divine sacrificial jade to strengthen your mental strength? If you help me today, I'll lend you the divine sacrificing jade for a year." Su Ting's eyes lit up when he heard that. He could not help but stand beside Dong Qikuan. The divine sacrificing jade was the Dong family's inherited treasure. Cultivating around it could strengthen one's mental strength. Even if one did not know any mental strength secret techniques, the divine sacrificing jade could still strengthen one's mental strength passively. However, the divine sacrificing jade was getting smaller and smaller. The divine sacrificing jade of the Dong family was the size of a fist, but it was only the size of a quail's egg now. Su Ting was weak in terms of mental strength. He had long wanted to borrow the divine sacrificing jade of the Dong family. However, even the people of the Dong family did not dare to use it recklessly, so why would they lend it to Su Ting? It was rare for Dong Qikuan to be generous, so Su Ting did not want to miss the opportunity. At the sight of this, everyone present shook their heads. Other than admitting defeat, Chu Xiu and Lv Fengxian seemed to have no other way out of this. Chu Xiu had a record of killing a martial Dao grandmaster, and Lu Fengxian also had a divine weapon. However, they were facing 3 martial Dao grandmasters. It was impossible for them to defeat them. But at that moment, Xia Xiaolu suddenly stood out and said, "My master thinks highly of Brother Lu. You refuse to give face to the Guanzhong torture room and Sword King City. Are you going to refuse to give face to my master?" Dong Qikuan and the others frowned. To be honest, the World Alliance's strength was definitely inferior to Sword King City's. Although the Sword King City was stronger than Sword King City's strength, the Qinqing Di Tian was. Xia Tian could ask Fang Qi Shao to stop meddling, but he did not dare to say anything to Di Chen Tian to alone. However, with the 9 revolutions cultivation method in front of him, a disciple of Qinqing Di would not be able to scare Dong Qikuan away. Looking at Xia Xiaolu, Dong Qikuan smiled and said, "Young Master Xia, although you're Alliance Head Chen's disciple, you still need to be reasonable. I'll give face to Alliance Head Chen, and I wouldn't dare to go against him. However, this kind of matter also depends on what face is involved. Today, you said that Lu Fengxian was favored by Alliance Master Chen, and my Dong clan gave you face. Tomorrow, you said that Zhang Fengxian was favored by Alliance Master Chen, and I had to give you face again. Even though Alliance Leader Chen was powerful, it wasn't to such an extent. How could he not allow others to touch someone he had his eyes on? There's no such tyrannical thing in this world. It's against the rules." Dong Qikuan's words caused the surrounding people to look at him with disdain. They hadn't realized before that Dong Qikuan, the head of the Dong family, was actually so shameless. It must be known that Dong Qikuan's current actions were incomparably tyrannical. What he was doing was breaking the rules, and now he was saying that others had broken the rules. Xia Xiaolu was immediately angered by Dong Qikuan's words to the point that his face turned red. He wasn't good with words, so he didn't know how to refute Dong Qikuan. However, at this moment, a thunderous and deafening voice suddenly resounded. Dong Qikuan, were you the one who said that you weren't going to give me face? Who gave you the guts to say such words in front of my disciple? As that voice rang out, a rumbling sound came from afar. Everyone looked up, only to see the trees in the distance being torn apart and falling to the ground. A black shadow quickly rushed over, like a black lightning, and in the blink of an eye, it had already arrived in front of Xia Xiaolu. It was actually a black tiger that was almost as tall as a person, and it was incomparably elegant. The black tiger squatted in front of Xia Xiaolu and reservedly stretched out its paw to pat Xia Xiaolu's back, as if it was comforting him. After seeing the black tiger, Xia Xiaolu's eyes immediately revealed a hint of joy. When they saw the black tiger, everyone's expression changed. In a place like West Chu, there were actually quite a few black tigers in the wilderness. However, there was only one that had this kind of terrifying speed and was so close to Xia Xiaolu. That was the black tiger that the World Alliance's alliance master, Chen Qingdi, was raising. Sure enough, everyone looked in the direction that the black tiger came from and saw a figure slowly walking over. With a single step, it crossed a distance of several dozen feet. It was a middle-aged man dressed in black. The tight-fitting black robe wrapped around his burly body, revealing his arms. On his forearms, there was even a pair of gauntlets. On the gauntlets were dazzling golden dragon tattoos, constantly twisting in the sunlight. From the looks of it, it was not an ordinary item. On his waist, there was also a belt with the same golden dragon tattoos. From the looks of it, it was an existence that came from the same source as the gauntlets. A scarlet cloak fluttered behind him. It didn't look evil, but rather boundless domineering. That aura even made it hard for everyone present to breathe. The World Alliance's Chen Qingdi. The Chen Qingdi who used a pair of iron fists to conquer 1,000 miles of land. When everyone present saw Chen Qingdi, no one paid attention to Chen Qingdi's appearance. They could only feel the extreme aura coming from Chen Qingdi's body. Xia Xiaolu was also stunned when he saw Chen Qingdi. He muttered, "Master, why are you here?" This time's mountain opening ceremony was because Chen Qingdi was too lazy to come here, so he sent Xia Xiaolu. But why did Chen Qingdi personally come here? Chen Qingdi lightly said, "Did you use the 100 by blade I gave you? I've left an imprint on it. As long as you use it, I'll be able to sense it. I have nurtured you for so long, wouldn't it be a pity if you were killed by something in the outside world?" Hearing Chen Qingdi's words, Xia Xiaolu suddenly understood. He had used some of the life-saving treasures given to him by Chen Qingdi in the big burial mound. He didn't expect that there would be Chen Qingdi's mark on them. Although his master's words were very awkward, he was very protective of him. Xia Xiaolu was used to it, so he naturally turned Chen Qingdi's words into concern. Dong Qikuan and the Dong family's old ancestor looked at each other. They didn't expect that Chen Qingdi would come this time. Although they kept saying that even if it was Chen Qingdi, he had to follow the rules, but now that Chen Qingdi was standing in front of them, they couldn't say a word. Just when Dong Qikuan wanted to say something, Chen Qingdi suddenly turned around and looked at him. He placed his left hand on the black tiger's head and gently stroked it. The handsome black tiger squinted its eyes like a kitten, enjoying Chen Qingdi's stroking. Being stared at by Chen Qingdi, Dong Qikuan instantly felt a powerful aura like Mount Tai pressing down on him. It was an extremely uncomfortable feeling. Dong Qikuan swallowed his saliva and said, "Chen," before he could say anything. Chen Qingdi directly waved his hand and said coldly, "Just now, you said that you didn't want to give me face? You said that I didn't follow the rules. You said that I was overbearing? Dong Qikuan hurriedly said. Alliance leader Chen, listen to me. Before he finished speaking, Chen Qingdi directly took a step forward. The ground under his feet suddenly cracked inch by inch, and the area within a radius of hundreds of feet was like an earthquake. With a punch, the whole world seemed to stand still in an instant, like a picture scroll. However, in the next moment, everything under that punch was shattered. God slaying God, fist shattering mountains and rivers. Dong Qikuan's expression suddenly changed, and countless sword lights rose from the long sword in his hand. Before he could fully display his sword force, everything was smashed by Chen Qingdi's punch. Gang Qi exploded, and the weapons were shattered. Dong Qikuan was directly sent flying by Chen Qingdi's punch for dozens of feet, and crashed into more than 10 giant trees in succession before he came to a stop. A large amount of blood gushed out, and he was immediately seriously injured. After withdrawing his punch, Chen Qingdi said coldly, "There's one thing you're right about, I am that overbearing. How dare a piece of trash like you say that you don't give me face? Why do I, Chen Qingdi, need you to give me face? What face do you deserve to give me?" This punch shocked everyone present. No one had expected that Dong Qikuan, who was also in the real pellet state and a martial Dao Grand Master, would be so vulnerable in the hands of Chen Qingdi. At this time, the patriarch of the Dong family seemed to have come to his senses. Looking at Dong Qikuan, who was seriously injured and vomiting blood, the patriarch of the Dong family shouted angrily, "Chen Qingdi! This is the Dong family, you!" Chen Qingdi glanced at the patriarch of the Dong family. His figure moved, and some of the weaker people couldn't even see Chen Qingdi's figure. However, in the next moment, Chen Qingdi had already appeared in front of the patriarch of the Dong family. In horror, the patriarch of the Dong family directly formed a seal with his hands. After all, he was a martial Dao Grand Master of the older generation, and he still had some trump cards. Boundless dazzling starlight condensed, and each spot of starlight condensed into a formation, trying to stop Chen Qingdi. However, Chen Qingdi directly slapped down. In an instant, the Gang Qi exploded, and the starlight was shattered. Chen Qingdi's right hand squeezed the patriarch of the Dong family's neck. The dragon pattern on the golden armor twisted like a formation pattern, directly sealing the genuine Qi of the patriarch of the Dong family's whole body. At this time, he was like an ordinary person, held up by the neck by Chen Qingdi, and stretched his legs helplessly. Staring at the patriarch of the Dong family, Chen Qingdi said in a calm and cold voice, "Old thing, what do you want to say? This is your Dong family, so what? Among the 9 major families, there is still the Wang family and the Li family. Believe it or not, I can make this place no longer belong to the Dong family tomorrow." Chapter 503. He seriously injured Dong Qikuan with one punch and subdued the patriarch of the Dong family with one move. Chen Qingdi's strength was beyond everyone's imagination. For most of the martial artists present, a martial Dao Grand Master was already an unreachable existence. But what about Chen Qingdi? The 2 martial Dao Grand Masters were like children that could not withstand a single blow. Su Tingyi stood motionless. He was not calm, but he did not dare to move. Although he had just promised Dong Qikuan that he would stand on their side, under Emperor Chen Qingdi's powerful aura, Su Tingyi was so scared that he didn't even dare to fart. Chu Xiu looked at Chen Qingdi. He had a hunch that although Chen Qingdi was still in the real pellet realm, he was not far from the true fire realm. He might even have half a foot in this realm. In the past, in the alliance of Demon Dao, Wei Shuya defeated Mountain Ghost of the moon-worshipping cult with one move. Although Chen Qingdi had not reached Wei Shuya's realm, the strength of the 2 patriarchs of the Dong family was not as strong as Mountain Ghost of the moon-worshipping cult's 9 great divine magus priests. At this time, the silence was terrible. When Chen Qingdi attacked, he looked down at everyone. His domineering aura could not be described with words. Dong Qikuan, who was seriously injured and vomited blood, did not dare to say another word. The patriarch of the Dong family, who was carried in the air by Qingdi like a dog, also did not dare to say another word. Seeing the look in Qingdi's eyes, the patriarch of the Dong family knew that Qingdi was not threatening him. He would do what he said. Although the Dong family and the World Alliance were both in West Chu, the Dong family rarely dealt with the World Alliance. One of them was one of the 9 great clans that had existed for a long time, while the other was an uncultivated force that had risen to power not long ago. The Dong clan had always maintained a respectful attitude towards the World Alliance and didn't want to provoke them. In the past, the Dong family had thought that even though Qingdi was overbearing, he still had to abide by the rules of the Jianghu. But after seeing him today, they realized that Qingdi wasn't overbearing at all. He was simply temperamental, and he acted like a madman without any scruples to the extreme. He had never considered whether the other 9 aristocratic families would come to him for an explanation if he really massacred the Dong family, whether the World Alliance would be damaged because of this, and how the West Chu martial arts world would view the World Alliance. It seemed that in Qingdi's eyes, there was only one result, and that was, those who obeyed him would prosper, and those who defied him would die. Sensing Qingdi's intention, the patriarch of the Dong family smiled bitterly and said, "Alliance leader Chen, my Dong family was rash in this matter. It's my Dong family's fault. I hope Alliance leader Chen can be magnanimous and let my Dong family off this time." As soon as he said this, everyone present was instantly dumbfounded. The faces of the Dong family's martial artists were flushed with shame and indignation, and they wished they could find a hole to hide in. Who didn't want to lose face in the Jianghu? But now, the patriarch of the Dong family's words could be said to be extremely soft. It was as if he had thrown his face to the ground and taken the initiative to trample on it. If this matter was spread out, the Dong family would become a laughing stock from now on. Compared with the Dong family, which had existed for thousands of years, the World Alliance had existed for less than 100 years. Compared with the patriarch of the Dong family, although Qingdi was powerful, his seniority was much lower than the patriarch of the Dong family. He and Dong Qikuan were of the same generation. But now, the patriarch of the Dong family had admitted defeat to Qingdi in an almost pleading tone. This was a great loss of face. In fact, only the patriarch of the Dong family knew that compared to his life, face was nothing. This time, the Dong family did not admit defeat. In the future, the Dong family's territory would really have to change its surname. With a cold laugh, Emperor Qingdi waved his hand and tossed the patriarch of the Dong clan aside. Then, he said coolly, "Remember, think before you speak next time. You should know who I am and what kind of person I am. I don't need you to give me face, and you're not qualified to give me face." The 2 martial Dao Grand Masters of the Dong family did not dare to say a word. Su Tingyi even lowered his head, hoping that Qingdi did not see him. However, at this moment, Qingdi also turned his eyes to him and said indifferently, "Are you also on the Dong family side?" Su Tingyi hurriedly said, "Alliance leader Chen, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not from the Dong family. It's just that I'm in the Dong family now, and I have no choice. I also hate the Dong family for bullying the weak." Qingdi sneered, but he did not expose Su Tingyi. He just sneered and said, "Idiot. Do you think I'm unhappy with the Dong family bullying the weak? The point is not that the Dong family is bullying the weak, but whose juniors he bullied. Get lost, and be more careful next time." Hearing Qingdi's words, Su Tingyi felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders, and he immediately scrammed. At this moment, Qingdi finally turned his eyes to Chu Xiu and the others. Looking at Lu Fengxian, Qingdi said with a smile, "Kid, what did I say before? If you were willing to join the World Alliance and worship me as your master, how would the Dong family dare to snatch the opportunity from you? In the Jianghu, strength is very important, comprehension is very important, and luck is very important. However, a backer is also very important. How is it? Do you regret it now? Lu Fengxian shook his head and said, "Thank you for your help, Senior Chen. However, I'm used to wandering around, and I have a master now. I can only thank Senior Chen for your kindness." Chen Qingdi also shook his head. If Lu Fengxian changed his mind and wanted to join the World Alliance, then he wouldn't be Lu Fengxian. Similarly, Chen Qingdi wouldn't appreciate him so much. At this time, Chen Qingdi turned his eyes to Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu only cupped his hands at Chen Qingdi and said, "Greetings, Senior Chen." Chen Qingdi nodded and sized up Chu Xiu. He raised his eyebrows and said, "You're Chu Xiu? I've always heard Xia Xiaolu mention you. I heard that you killed a grandmaster this time. Although that guy is a bit useless, he's still a martial Dao grandmaster. You're not bad, very good." Xia Xiaolu looked at Chen Qingdi in surprise. Others might not know, but he knew Chen Qingdi's character. There weren't many people in the Jianghu who could make Chen Qingdi say, "Not bad," twice in a row. Lu Fengxian was the same. Since Chen Qingdi said that Chu Xiu was not bad, then he was really not bad. At this time, Chen Qingdi looked at Fang Qi Xiao and said with a strange gaze, "You're also a good swordsman. There aren't many people in Sword King City who are pleasing to the eye, but you're one of the few who aren't. I just don't know if Sword King City will regret choosing you as its successor in the future." Fang Qi Xiao's eyes widened as he touched his chin. Was Chen Qingdi praising him or praising him? Why did he feel that something was wrong? However, Fang Qi Xiao didn't think too much about it. In any case, Chen Qingdi said that he was not bad. Being recognized by such a fierce person, even Fang Qi Xiao felt a bit excited. Chen Qingdi waved his hand and said, "Come with me. We'll go to the World Alliance to recuperate for a while. Don't worry, not to mention the inheritance of demon god Lu Wenho, even if you have the inheritance of the Kunlun devil cult, no one would dare to come to my World Alliance to exterminate demons." After saying that, Chen Qingdi was about to leave. The Dong family's disciples made way for him, their eyes filled with awe. Just as Chu Xiu passed by the Dong family's disciples, Chu Xiu suddenly said, "Senior Chen, you've offended the Dong family this time. You've trampled on their dignity. However, I'm afraid that some people won't accept it, and they'll cause trouble for you again in the future. It's better to cut the weeds and get rid of the roots." As soon as these words were spoken, the members of the Dong clan were instantly stunned on the spot. The Dong clan's ancestor and Dong Qikuan cursed Chu Xiu in their hearts in unison. This bastard is simply malicious to the extreme. He's clearly provoking Emperor Chen Qing to eradicate the Dong clan. Chen Qingdi looked at Chu Xiu in surprise. Then he laughed and said, "Boy, you're really vicious. You're even more ruthless than me. However, it doesn't matter. I've cut the weeds and got rid of the roots before. However, I'm in a good mood today, so I'll let them go this time. If they don't know what's good for them, I don't mind changing the name of this place." Hearing this, the patriarch of the Dong family and Dong Qikuan both heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, Emperor Chen Qingdi acted according to his mood. If he was a little more rational and ruthless, he might really have slaughtered the entire Dong family. After Chen Qingdi left, the patriarch of the Dong family and Dong Qikuan exchanged a glance. Their eyes were filled with bitterness. Now that Chen Qingdi had left, would they dare to take revenge on him? Would they dare to look for trouble with the Heaven Alliance? Just now, Chen Qingdi had left a great shadow in their hearts. He was like a demon god, and he was so powerful that they couldn't bring themselves to take revenge on him. After leaving the dense forest, Chen Qingdi said to Chu Xiu and Lu Fengxian, "You two kids, go back to the Heaven Alliance with me. I've said that as long as you're in the Heaven Alliance, even if you get the inheritance of the Kunlun devil cult, no one will dare to take revenge on you." Chu Xiu and Lu Fengxian exchanged a glance. Chu Xiu stepped forward, cupped his hands, and said, "Thank you for your kindness, Alliance Leader Chen. However, I'm going back to the Guanzhong torture room with Brother Lu. Guanzhong is located between the three countries, and there aren't many forces around. Moreover, I believe that with the strength of the Guanzhong torture room, no one will dare to take revenge on us." Hearing Chu Xiu's words, Chen Qingdi didn't insist. He just nodded and said, "You can go back to the Guanzhong torture room. Guan Siyu isn't a weakling. Most importantly, the Guanzhong torture room has the shadow of Chu Juxia. If other forces want to rob the Guanzhong torture room, they will have to think twice." With that said, Chen Qingdi turned his gaze to Lu Fengxian and said in a deep voice, "Little girl, are you really not considering taking me as your master and joining the Heaven Alliance? In this Jianghu, having a backer and not having one are two different things. Look at that little boy named Chu. His thoughts are deeper than yours, and he is stronger than you, but he still joined the Guanzhong torture hall and found a good backer." Lu Fengxian shook her head with a bitter smile and said, "Senior Chen, I'm a little embarrassed by your repeated invitations, but I really don't want to be here." Hearing Lu Fengxian say this, Chen Qingdi didn't insist. After Xia Xiaolu bid farewell to Lu Fengxian and Chu Xiu, the two groups left. Chapter 504. After Lu Fengxian and Chu Xiu left, they prepared to return to the Guanzhong torture room. The news of LV Wenho's inheritance had not spread out yet, so as long as they rushed back to the Guanzhong torture room in time, they would not have to worry about anyone coveting the inheritance. In fact, the best way for Lu Fengxian now was to join a top-notch force like the World Alliance and find a backer to protect her. LV Wenho's inheritance was indeed tempting, but people like Chen Qingdi had their own martial Dao, so they would not be interested in LV Wenho's inheritance, even if it was a 9-transformation inheritance. It was a pity that LV Fengxian looked like a person who was easy to talk to, but she was extremely stubborn. Not to mention Chu Xiu, no one could persuade her. At this moment, a voice suddenly came from the forest, and 4 Xiantian realm martial artists rushed over. After seeing Lu Fengxian, the 4 of them knelt on one knee, lowered their heads, and said in a deep voice, "We greet the Lord." Lu Fengxian was dumbfounded, and he asked doubtfully, "Who are you?" Hearing their tone, Chu Xiu suddenly reacted. Why did they sound like Shui Wuxiang and the others when they spoke in such a tone? Chu Xiu asked in a deep voice, "You are Shui Wuxiang and the others?" Among the 4, a tall and thin man with a blue face smiled bitterly, "Yes, we are." At this time, Chu Xiu and Lu Fengxian suddenly remembered that these people were indeed not dead. At that time, Lu Fengxian had just fused with LV Wenho's true soul, and Shui Wuxiang and the others were already at the end of their lives, so they could only randomly choose 4 people to possess. As there were too many people at that time, Chu Xiu and the others did not pay attention to the targets they were possessing. Lu Fengxian asked curiously, "Why are you calling me Lord now? I'm not Marquis Lu Wenho, and it's because of me that Marquis Lu Wenho's true spirit shattered. You should be looking for me for revenge." Shui Wuxiang bitterly smiled, "This is fate. Maybe in this era, Lord Wenho no longer has the possibility of revival. Not only that, Lord Wenho is 80% similar to Lord Wenho when he was young. You have even inherited all of Lord Wenho's cultivation arts, and even the divine weapon Unparalleled is willing to recognize you as its master. It can be said that you are the current Lord Wenho. If we don't recognize you as our master, who else can we recognize?" Lu Fengxian frowned and wanted to refuse. He was used to being alone, so he didn't want to accept any servants at this time. However, at this time, Chu Xiu transmitted his voice to Lu Fengxian, "Brother Lu, take these 4 people. You won't lose out." Among the 4 of them, Shui Wuxiang was the most proficient in scheming formations. Although his combat power wasn't strong, he was extremely strange. Yan Qishao and Shi Jiuling were battle generals, and their strengths weren't weak. Xian Jiuyo didn't know what he was good at, but since he was able to follow Marquis Lu Wenho in that era, he obviously wasn't a weakling. Don't underestimate them just because they are only in the Xiantian realm after the possession. They were once existences that surpassed the martial Dao Grandmaster realm. Although their strength is gone, they still have the experience. Now that they have cultivated again, it won't be difficult. If you take these 4 people, the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. Lu Fengxian was quite convinced by Chu Xiu's vision. Hearing Chu Xiu's words, Lu Fengxian nodded and said, "Since it's like this, you can follow me. But first, you have to change your tone, it's uncomfortable to listen to it. Since you've already possessed, I believe you should understand some things about the current era, right?" Shui Wuxiang and the others nodded and said, We know." Lu Fengxian nodded and suddenly asked, "By the way, do you know how to make things like cultivation jade strips?" Shui Wuxiang said proudly, "Subordinates' cultivation in the Tao of arrays is not inferior to those array masters of the Tao Gate. Of course I know how to make something as simple as cultivation jade strips, but I don't have the materials at the moment, so I can't make it. May I ask, Lord, do you want to keep it for a long time or for temporary use?" "If it's for temporary use, subordinate can make one now." Lu Fengxian said, "For temporary use." Shui Wuxiang nodded. He directly plucked a few wild fruits from the roadside, squeezed out the water, and condensed it with his true qi. Then, he outlined a few array patterns on it, and it actually turned into something that looked like a soft candy. "Lord, this thing can only be used once. As long as the cultivation technique inside is read by someone, or after 3 days, this thing will dissipate." Shui Wuxiang's face was a little pale. Right now, he was only in the Xiantian realm. Even making such a small thing had consumed a lot of his true qi. Lu Fengxian took it and infused the 9 heavens fiend golden body cultivation technique into it. Then, she passed it to Chu Xiu and said, "Brother Chu, it was you who brought me here this time. If not for you, I wouldn't have had any fate with Marquis Lu Wenho's inheritance. This is Marquis Lu Wenho's body tempering cultivation technique, 9 heavens fiend golden body. Keep it. When Shui Wuxiang's true qi recovers, I'll get him to make another cultivation jade strip and pass it to you." Hearing this, Shui Wuxiang hurriedly stopped her and said, "Lord, you can't. This is a legacy cultivation technique left behind by Lord Marquis Lu Wenho. How can it be given out so casually?" Lu Fengxian did not get angry. Instead, he said with an indifferent expression, "Are you the Lord, or am I the Lord?" Shui Wuxiang smiled bitterly and did not continue to stop Lu Fengxian. He also discovered that although this Lu Fengxian's overall personality was different from Lord Marquis Lu Fengxian's, there were some details that were very similar to Lord Marquis Lu Fengxian's personality. As long as Lord Marquis Lu Wenho decided on something, no one could stop him. Now, Lu Fengxian was the same. As long as he decided on something, no one could stop him. Such a personality could be said to be extremely decisive. However, no one knew whether it was good or bad. After all, in ancient times, if Marquis Lu Wenho had listened to Shui Wuxiang's advice and temporarily kept a low profile, he would not have fallen into such a situation. Chu Xiu also did not stand on ceremony with Lu Fengxian. He took the cultivation technique imparting item and said, "Many thanks, Brother Lu. I also happen to be in need of a top-notch body tempering cultivation technique. I won't stand on ceremony with you. However, I don't need the demon god's unparalleled halberd. I am a saber user. Changing to halberd would take too much time." Hearing Chu Xiu's words, Lu Fengxian did not force the cultivation technique to Chu Xiu. The two of them brought Shui Wuxiang and the others back to the Guanzhong torture room. Inside the Guanxi torture chamber headquarters, hearing the news of Chu Xiu's return, the Ghost Hand Monarch specially brought people out to welcome him. Chu Xiu had not even entered the door when the Ghost Hand Monarch was already laughing and cupping his fists. Congratulations to Lord for beheading a Grandmaster and entering the 4th place on the Dragon and Tiger list. Chu Xiu asked in surprise, this matter has already spread out? The Ghost Hand Monarch nodded and said, it has been spread out for a long time. Lord, your reputation in the underworld is now becoming more and more resounding. Along the way, Chu Xiu was afraid of any accidents, so he had been rushing with Lu Fengxian at full speed, but he did not care about the news outside. The wind-sweeping buildings' actions were quite fast. The Ghost Hand Monarch cupped his fists at Lu Fengxian and said, I heard that young Marquis Wen has obtained the inheritance of the ancient demon god Marquis Lu Wenho. This is also a cause for celebration. Lu Fengxian also greeted the Ghost Hand Monarch politely. Alright, let's go in and talk. Chu Xiu then asked the Ghost Hand King about what had happened during this period of time after inviting the crowd into the hall. The series of events that happened after Marquis Lu Wenho's land of inheritance had spread throughout the underworld in a few days, and it was quite well known. Among them, the most outstanding one was Chu Xiu, who killed a Grandmaster. After becoming the little celestial master Zhang Qingzhen, he was another young martial artist who killed a martial Dao Grandmaster in public. Therefore, Chu Xiu was also promoted to the 4th place on the Longhu list. The previous 4th place was an extremely mysterious guy, soul-snatching saber Li Failian. The number of times this person had attacked in the underworld could be counted on one hand. He attacked 11 times and killed 10 people. The only time he used 2 sabers to kill was a genius of the younger generation of Chunyang Dao sect. In the end, the younger generation of Chunyang Dao sect suffered a huge blow and was unable to recover. Although the title given to him by the people of the underworld was a little cliché, it really fit the image. When Li Failian attacked, his saber would seize souls and blood. There had never been a survivor, no matter who the opponent was or what the opponent's identity was. Because of the death of their disciple, Chunyang Dao sect had been hunting him for a long time, but to no avail. However, it was unknown whether it was because of the Chunyang Dao sect's pursuit, but Li Failian had not appeared in the underworld for the past 2 or 3 years, and there was no news of his achievements. Therefore, he could only give up his position to Chu Xiu. Moreover, this time, Li Failian not only gave up his position to Chu Xiu, but he also gave up his position to Ying Bailu. He directly fell to the 6th place, and Ying Bailu returned to the 5th place on the Longhu list. In the Big Tomb, Ying Bailu fought Chu Xiu with all his strength, and they were evenly matched. With the strength that Ying Bailu showed, he was ranked behind Chu Xiu. The only thing he lacked was an amazing achievement like Chu Xiu. As for Lu Fengxian, his ranking still did not change. The reason was very simple. Although Lu Fengxian had obtained the inheritance, he did not have any achievements. The reputation list looked at reputation and achievements, and both were indispensable. However, everyone also believed that after obtaining Wenho's inheritance, Lu Fengxian's strength would definitely skyrocket, and it was only a matter of time before his ranking rose. This was just a change among the younger generation, so Chu Xiu did not care too much about it. In fact, at Chu Xiu's position, he really did not care about the Longhu list. It was not only Chu Xiu, but it should be said that the top 5 existences on the Longhu list, like Ying Bailu and the others, did not care about the rankings on the list. Their own strength was there for everyone to see, so who was strong and who was weak, didn't they have a point in their hearts? Things like the Longhu list were just for fun. On the contrary, the martial artists at the bottom were fighting for a position in the rankings every day, and it was very lively. Apart from the changes on the Longhu list, the one who had really become famous this time was Qinqing Di, and the one who was out of luck was the Dong family. Qinqing Di had not made a move for a period of time. The people of the Jianghu were forgetful, and some people had even forgotten about Qinqing Di's former fame. As a result, when Qinqing Di made a move this time, the whole Jianghu knew about it, and people could not help but sigh. Qinqing Di was still the same Qinqing Di. Chapter 505. Qianqing was as domineering as ever. Some people even suspected that Qianqing was not far from the true fire spiritual cultivation realm. At the level of a martial Dao Grandmaster, every improvement in cultivation was as difficult as ascending to the heavens, let alone taking another step forward. Qianqing was born in the wilderness. If he could step into the true fire spiritual cultivation realm, the Tianxia alliance would be really powerful. However, compared with the domineering Qianqing, the Dong family's reputation was ruined this time, and they played the role of a clown. Originally, the Dong family had disregarded the rules of the opening ceremony and robbed the opportunities of the younger generation martial artists, which was already very disreputable. As a result, the two Wu Dao grandmasters of the Dong family were humiliated by Qianqing on the spot, which was a miserable scene. This time, it could be said that the Dong family's reputation was ruined. They were destined to become the laughingstock of Jianghu for several years, and even the disciples of the Dong family would not be able to raise their heads in Jianghu in the future. They had seen Wu Dao grandmasters who were unafraid of death, but it was really rare to see someone like the patriarch of the Dong family begging for mercy in Jianghu. After learning about the situation, Chu Xiu and Lu Fengxian went to do closed-door training first. However, Lu Fengxian was in closed-door training to break through to the oneness of heaven and man, while Chu Xiu was recovering his primordial qi first. On the way, Chu Xiu only cared about hurrying and did not even have a rest. However, at this time, the Ghost Hand King said with some hesitation, "My lord, there's something I have to tell you." Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows and said, "What's the matter? Are those martial arts forces in Guanxi starting to make trouble again?" There was no lack of fools in Jianghu who were blinded by greed. Logically speaking, with the current strength and status of Chu Xiu in Jianghu, the Guanxi area should be very quiet. However, there were people who were blinded by a little profit, so if this kind of thing happened, Chu Xiu would not be surprised at all. The Ghost Hand King shook his head and said, "It's not those martial arts forces in Guanxi, but people from the Guannan branch." Chu Xiu frowned and said, "Yin Butong's men? What did they do?" Among the 4 branches of the Guanzhong torture room, Guanbei torture officer Chu Simo was on his side because his godson, Chu Xiaoda, had joined the 9-branch hall. Xiao Yi, the Guandong penal officer, was the strongest, but he had always maintained a neutral position and did not help either side. Only this Yin Batong made things difficult for Chu Xiu. In fact, Yin Batong couldn't get over it. Chu Xiu had crippled his disciple and killed one of his disciples, but Yin Batong was a cold-hearted person. In all fairness, he didn't spend much effort on his 2 disciples. Moreover, Yin Batong had fought with Wei Jiuduan his entire life. Now that Chu Xiu had helped him get rid of Wei Jiuduan, Yin Batong should be thanking Chu Xiu. In the end, Yin Batong always thought of the grudge, so he naturally found Chu Xiu to be an eyesore. The Ghost Hand King said, "Your Excellency, you've been gone for a long time this time. The Guanxi region has been without a ruler for a long time, so some constables from the Guannan region have come to investigate smuggling. They often cross the border to investigate some forces at the border of the Guanxi region and the Guannan region. Even if those forces are in the Guanxi region, they still investigate them. They even blackmail those forces, causing the martial arts forces at the border of the Guanxi region and the Guannan region to suffer greatly. They have complained to me many times. Therefore, it's not good for me to continue accepting gifts from those forces. This matter has also caused the reputation of our Guanxi branch at the border to fall." Chu Xiu said with a gloomy face, "The Guannan people came to our Guanxi area to investigate smuggling. They are the ones who crossed the border and broke the rules. Are you just going to stand by and let them be arrogant?" Ghost Hand King smiled bitterly, "My lord, we don't have a choice. Those people in Guannan said that the clue came from Guannan and spread all the way to Guanxi. We can take over, but we need my lord's warrant, because they also came with Yin Butong's warrant. Therefore, when Sir is not here, we can't be tough with the Guannan people." Yen Bugue wanted to take action, but I stopped him. It's not that I don't want to be tough, but when Sir is not here, once we take action, it will be hard to explain. Even if we are in the right, it will become unreasonable. I even suspect that the Guannan people are so arrogant that they are forcing us to take action. So I have been waiting for Sir to come back to deal with this matter. Chu Xiu nodded when he heard this. He patted the ghostly hand king's shoulder and said, I misunderstood you. You are experienced and prudent. What you did was right. That fellow Yin Batong is most likely planning this. Yin Batong has been in the Guanzhong torture room for so many years and is very familiar with the rules of Guanzhong torture room. He should know that crossing the border is against the rules, but he still did it. Obviously, he is taking advantage of Chu Xiu's absence and no one in the entire Guanxi area can talk to him on equal terms. The Ghost Hand King asked, Sir, what should we do now? Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, I will go into seclusion for a while. Keep a close eye on the border between Guanxi and Guannan. If Yin Butong's people come here again, tell me. After giving the Ghost Hand King his orders, Chu Xiu went into seclusion. While recovering Yuan Qi, Chu Xiu also tried to practice the Nine Heavens Fiend Golden Body. In the original plot, LV Fengxian was the only one who cultivated this cultivation method. In addition, with LV Fengxian's personality, he would naturally not share these things about the cultivation method with others. Therefore, in the original plot, the description of this cultivation method was very vague. At this time, Chu Xiu let out a long breath after reading the cultivation method. Sure enough, although this cultivation method is very strong, it has a strong aura of Lu Wenho, and its nature is very rough. The meaning of the Nine Heavens is the Nine Heavens, and the Nine Heavens Fiend Golden Body also has 9 realms. Every realm required one to follow the instructions of the cultivation method. One had to cleanse the body with powerful demonic energy and forcefully temper the body with demonic energy. Not to mention the pain involved. If one's physical body was weaker, they would directly cripple themselves while tempering their body with demonic energy. The higher the level of the cultivation method, the better it is. Although some cultivation methods have high levels, not everyone is qualified to practice them. For example, Chu Xiu's Avicii 3 blades, if an ordinary person uses it, he will become a madman. Only people like Chu Xiu, who have a strong mind and a Buddhist treasure, glazed golden silk goo, dare to use it casually. The Nine Heavens Fiend Golden Body is the same, the requirements for the cultivator are too high. Even if the Dong family obtains the Nine Heavens Fiend Golden Body, there are only a few people in the Dong family who are qualified to practice this cultivation method. Although a martial arts grandmaster like Dong Qikuan can forcibly practice several realms with his cultivation, he can only practice 3 realms at most, and his body will not be able to bear this kind of power. Lu Fengxian was born with divine strength, so there will be no obstacles for her to practice the Nine Heavens Fiend Golden Body. Chu Xiu has the Great Vajra divine strength as a foundation, and his body is not weak, so he is naturally qualified. Moreover, although the Nine Heavens Fiend Golden Body is simple and violent, and the cultivation conditions are rough, its power is unusually strong. Each step is a heaven, and each realm will greatly increase the strength of the body, and there is also demonic energy to protect the body. When the cultivation reaches the 9th realm, it will reach the level of the immortal demon body, and it is common for the cultivator to regrow broken limbs. For example, if the cultivator cultivates to the realm of LV Wenho, he is simply an existence that cannot be killed, and even the Tao and Buddhist sects have to work together to suppress his body. At present, Chu Xiu possessed both the Buddhist and demon sects' body tempering techniques. Who knew what would happen if he were to cultivate both at the same time? Inextinguishable golden body and inextinguishable demon body? However, Chu Xiu does not care about it. He cultivates Tao, Buddhist, and demon sects at the same time, so he is not worried about the cultivation method backfiring. Just after Chu Xiu has been in seclusion for a few days, the Ghost Hand King came to knock on the door of Chu Xiu's seclusion room, and said in a low voice, "Your Excellency, those people in Guannan have crossed the boundary again." A trace of coldness flashed in Chu Xiu's eyes, and he said, "Take me there." At this time, at the border between Guanxi and Guannan, in front of the Lu family's mansion, the Lu family master, Lu Qingqian, was speaking in a low voice to several Jianghu constables from the Guanzhong torture room. The Lu family is only a small family in Guanxi, and the Lu family master, Lu Qingqian, is only in the inner gang realm. The Jianghu constables said lightly, "Lu family master, we are investigating people smuggling contraband into West Chu, and the source is your Lu family. Does the Lu family master want to explain this matter?" Of course, it is fine if the Lu family master doesn't want to explain, but us brothers came all the way from Guannan, and after spending so much effort, we can't go back empty-handed, right? Why don't the Lu family master say something and we can drop this matter for now? Lu Qingqian said with a forced smile, "How much do you want?" In fact, Lu Qingqian was already used to this kind of thing, because it was not the first time. The Guannan region's Jianghu constables had been extorting the small aristocratic families of the border area for a period of time. This was already the third time for the Lu clan. Now, all the powers of the border area could be said to be filled with complaints. At the same time, they were cursing Chu Xiu in their hearts. They were all under the jurisdiction of Guanxi, and according to Chu Xiu's request, they had to give him a lot of offerings every month. Now they were being bullied, and Chu Xiu didn't even dare to fart, so how could they look up to him? In this border, many forces thought that Chu Xiu was tyrannical. He could be ruthless to the forces of Guanxi, but when facing outsiders, he would be terrified. The Guannan constables looked at each other and said lightly, "We don't want much. There are 8 of us here, and each of us has 10 taels of purple gold. 80 taels is enough." Hearing this, Lu Qingqian's expression suddenly changed, and he quickly said, "Gentlemen, my Lu family really can't take out so much purple gold." In fact, the Lu family had 80 taels of purple gold before, but this group of people had come to the Lu family 3 times in a few months, so how could they take out these things? The Jianghu constables heard this and sneered, "Can't take it out? Well, then come with me to Guannan torture hall." Chapter 506. The Jianghu arresters of Guannan were here to pick a fight. Anyway, this was Guanxi. What could they do even if they forced all the martial arts forces in Guanxi to rebel? It was the Guanxi branch that was having a headache. Moreover, Yin Batong had come with the intention of making trouble. He had even told his men not to worry so much. They could go too far, and if anything happened, he would take the blame. At this time, the people of the Lu family were filled with righteous indignation. This was going too far. If the Guanxi branch didn't care, they could go to the headquarters of the punishment hall to reason with them. But at this moment, a voice came from behind them. People from the Guannan branch came to Guanxi to arrest people. Who gave you the guts? Chu Xiu came with Ghost Hand King Tangya and a dozen other people. There was no anger on his face, but the oppressive atmosphere made the Jianghu arresters of Guannan slightly change their expressions. They had been arrogant here for a while, but Chu Xiu didn't show up. The words they had thought of didn't work, and the Ghost Hand King and the others didn't dare to meet them. So the Jianghu arresters of Guannan were very arrogant. But now, seeing Chu Xiu coming, and thinking of the rumors about Chu Xiu in the Guanzhong torture room and his reputation in Jianghu, even the Jianghu arresters who had been prepared couldn't help but feel a little nervous. But when they thought of Yin Batong behind them, the Jianghu arresters of Guannan torture hall seemed to be a little more courageous. He forced himself to say, "Official Chu, we didn't come to Guanxi to arrest people, but to trace the smuggling clues from Guannan to Guanxi. According to the rules of the Guanzhong torture room, if Official Chu wanted to take over the case, we would naturally hand it over. But Official Chu wasn't here before, so no one else was qualified to ask us to hand over the case." Chu Xiu stared at the cultivator from the Guannan branch. His expression didn't change in the slightest as he calmly said, "Let me ask you, who gave you the courage to come to Guanxi to arrest people?" Under Chu Xiu's gaze, the Guannan martial artist's forehead gradually oozed a layer of cold sweat, but he still forced himself to say, "Official Chu, I've already said that this is the rule." Chu Xiu waved his hand and cut off the martial artist's words. "I don't want to ask the same thing a third time. Since you don't want to tell me who gave you the courage, I'll just take it that you're extremely bold. Also, don't talk about rules with me. The premise of talking about rules is that you have the qualifications and strength. Only then can we play under the same rules. Who do you think you are to talk about rules with me?" Chu Xiu turned to Tang Ye and the others and said, "Break all their legs, abolish their martial arts, and let them crawl back to Guannan. I'd like to see if they still have the courage at that time." The Guannan martial artists' expression suddenly changed, and they hurriedly said, "Official Chu, we are," but before they could finish speaking, Tang Ye and the others had already made their move. Previously, because of the Ghost Hand King's obstruction, Tang Ye and the others were unbearably aggrieved. Now that Chu Xiu had finally returned, if anything happened, Official Chu would naturally take responsibility. Since this was the case, what was there for them to be afraid of? Therefore, Tang Ye and the others directly attacked, and in an instant, the 8 Guannan martial artists' legs were broken and crippled. Miserable howls sounded instantly. Listening to the miserable howls, Lu Qingxian and the other Lu family members all trembled. Before, they still had some resentment towards Chu Xiu, but now they didn't even dare to have the slightest bit of resentment. At this time, Chu Xiu also looked at Lu Qingxian, and said lightly, "Lu family head, you have been wronged during this time." Lu Qingxian hurriedly said respectfully, "Don't dare, my lord, please don't say that. It was those Guannan people who went too far." Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "I, Chu Xiu, am not an unreasonable person. As long as you are willing to abide by my rules, then if anything happens, it will be my responsibility. This time it was my negligence, I will compensate for your Lu family's loss." Saying this, Chu Xiu directly threw out a cultivation method, but it was not his own cultivation method, but an ordinary cultivation method passed down by the Guanzhong torture room to the Jianghu constables. It was only a third revolution cultivation method, but it was extremely precious for the Lu family. When Lu family head saw that cultivation method, although he was also extremely envious, he still said, "Official Chu, you don't have to do this, I am ashamed to accept it." Chu Xiu said lightly, "I told you to accept it, so accept it. I don't want to say the same thing twice." Hearing this, Lu family head immediately put away the cultivation method, and shed tears of gratitude to Chu Xiu, without a trace of resentment in his heart. Ghost Hand King, who was behind, nodded. Milord's methods were getting more and more skillful. With such a combination of kindness and power, the Lu family would probably have to be respectful to Milord from now on, let alone resenting Milord. Listen to Official Chu, even if you were wronged, Official Chu would make it up to you, and he would never let you suffer losses. On the contrary, if you were disobedient, the Guannan martial artists who were still wailing on the ground were a good example. One day after this incident, all the martial arts forces in the entire Guanxi area knew that Official Chu was back. In the past, when Chu Xiu was here, those martial arts forces still resented him in their hearts, feeling that Chu Xiu was too lenient and too strict. But this time, when people from the Guannan area came to their door, they realized that although Chu Xiu was a little strict, once something happened, they still needed Chu Xiu to take responsibility. Thus, not only did this incident not affect Chu Xiu's reputation, but it also caused his reputation to soar. Of course, while Chu Xiu's reputation soared, some people, such as Yin Batong, were furious at this time. "Chu Xiu, you are so lawless." After seeing his 8 men's martial arts destroyed by Chu Xiu and their legs broken, Yin Batong was so angry that he directly smashed the table next to him. In fact, Yin Batong had already known the news that Chu Xiu returned to Guanzhong, but he did not ask his men to restrain themselves. Anyway, they had already caused trouble, so why should they restrain themselves? Chu Xiu was indeed famous in Jianghu, but here was the Guanzhong torture room. Everyone here was a torture officer, so everything had to be done according to the rules. Yin Baotong had been in the Guanzhong torture room for a lifetime. No one knew these rules better than him. Chu Xiu was far from being able to compete with him in this aspect. However, Yin Baotong did not expect that Chu Xiu did not care about the rules at all and directly destroyed 8 of his men. If Yin Baotong swallowed this matter, he would not be able to stay in the Guanzhong torture room anymore. Let's go. Come with me to find Chu Xiu and ask for an explanation. As his voice fell, Yin Baotong went straight to the Guanxi branch with a group of people. At the gate of the Guanxi branch, Tangya moved a chair over and leaned against it lazily to guard the door. Tangya naturally would not do something like guarding the door, but Chu Xiu had said that Yin Baotong would definitely come to make trouble, so Tangya volunteered to guard the door here. He had also been very sullen during this period of time. If it were not for Ghost Hand Lord stopping him, not to mention Yan Bugue wanting to make a move, even he could not help but want to kill those arrogant guys. At this moment, at the end of the long street, Yin Baotong came to the door with a gloomy face with a group of people. Seeing Tangya, Yin Baotong said coldly, "Let Chu Xiu come out to see me." Tangya glanced at him and did not say anything. Yin Baotong suddenly showed a touch of anger on his face and shouted, "I said, let Chu Xiu come out to see me. Are you blind or deaf? Didn't you hear me?" Tangya did not even look up and sneered, "Ridiculous. You don't even say your name? If you don't say your name, how would I know which Tom, Dick, or Harry you are? Besides, even if you say your name, Official Chu is busy with work, so he won't meet Tom, Dick, or Harry. Disrespectful words, you're courting death." Yin Baotong's eyes showed a touch of anger. He took a step forward and immediately blasted a palm at Tangya. However, at this time, Tangya's figure was like a willow catkin. His figure was erratic and he easily dodged Yin Baotong's palm. This caused Yin Baotong to be taken aback. Yin Baotong's nickname was the Shadowless Dragon. Although he was fat and short, his movement speed was not ordinary. However, where did this subordinate of Chu Xiu come from? He actually had such a cultivation level of speed at the 3-flower realm. However, after being stunned for a while, Yin Baotong became even more furious and wanted to attack Tangya. However, at this time, Chu Xiu's cold voice came from inside, "Yin Baotong, how dare you touch my people in my territory? Do you want to die?" Pushing the door open, Chu Xiu slowly walked out of the Guanxi branch with his men. When Yin Baotong saw Chu Xiu, his eyes suddenly turned red, and he angrily said, "Chu Xiu, what do you mean by crippling 8 of my Jianghu constables? Killing each other is strictly prohibited in the Guanzhong torture room. What you've done has violated the rules of the torture chamber. If you don't give me an explanation today, I'll go to the hall master and ask for justice." Narrowing his eyes, Chu Xiu said faintly, "Law? Justice? Yin Baotong, you know what those idiots under your command did. They offended their superiors, and it's already good enough that I didn't kill them. And you, don't think that I don't know who gave them the courage to do this. Wei Jiuduan is dead, and the grudges of the past should be written off. However, you've provoked my bottom line again and again. Do you really want to die?" When Chu Xiu said the last sentence, an extremely strong pressure suddenly fell on Yin Baotong. It was extremely fierce, and it immediately made Yin Baotong's hair stand on end. There was a serious look in his eyes. In fact, Yin Baotong was also considered a figure in the Jianghu. As the torture officer of Guannan, he could be considered a veteran in the Jianghu. He was also a person with real power in the Guanzhong torture room. However, the problem was that compared to Chu Xiu, Yin Baotong's experience was like a frog at the bottom of a well. It was not worth mentioning. Now, those who could compete with Chu Xiu were the top talents of the younger generation, as well as the warriors of the older generation who had reached the Master Realm. To put it bluntly, Immortal was now not even qualified to challenge Chu Xiu. Chapter 507. Under Chu Xiu's pressure, Immortal felt a sense of horror in his heart. This was a feeling of fear, and it made Immortal feel very ashamed. He was a martial artist of the older generation, and his experience in the Guanzhong torture room was much deeper than Chu Xiu's. But now, he was actually suppressed to such a state in front of Chu Xiu. How could Immortal tolerate this? Taking a deep breath, Immortal snorted coldly. Chu Xiu, don't talk so much nonsense. You crippled 8 of my subordinates. You have to give me an explanation for this matter. Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows. Explanation? You still want an explanation? Fine, I'll give you an explanation. As soon as he finished speaking, Chu Xiu's entire body was instantly enveloped by a murderous intent. A boundless ferocious aura covered Chu Xiu's entire body. With a punch, he executed the immortal slaying god, heaven extinguishing earth annihilating oblivion killing fist. Being enveloped by that boundless ferocious aura, Immortal was instantly shocked. He had never expected that Chu Xiu would actually attack without any hesitation. He had already used a killing move right from the start. This time, when he saw Chu Xiu, Immortal had a strange feeling. It was only now that he understood what was strange about Chu Xiu. This Chu Xiu's attitude was completely different from before. Although Chu Xiu was also very aggressive before, in the eyes of those in the Guanzhong torture room, Chu Xiu was still an outstanding figure among the younger martial artists. When facing other torture officers, he could still maintain a respectful attitude. Even when facing Immortal, who deliberately caused trouble for Chu Xiu actually retorted verbally within the rules. But this time, when Chu Xiu faced him again, his attitude was extremely unyielding. No, it would be more appropriate to say that he was arrogant. He had no scruples at all. This was the change in attitude brought about by the gap in strength. Chu Xiu was a person who abided by the rules, but at the same time, he was also a person who did not like to abide by the rules. Your strength is the same as mine, so I'll play with you within the rules. However, if you're weaker than me, then there's no need to talk about rules. You can just attack me. Currently, in the entire Guanzhong torture room, there weren't many people who were qualified to talk to Chu Xiu about the rules. Obviously, Immortal wasn't that person. Under Chu Xiu's punch, Immortal was horrified. His first reaction was not to block, but to escape. Immortal's figure moved, and his gang qi spread all over his body like a gale. Then, he hurriedly retreated. However, at this moment, Chu Xiu's left hand formed a seal with a single hand. The wisdom fist seal was displayed, and in an instant, the gang qi field spread out. The net of heaven and earth, imprisoning everything. In the wisdom fist seal's gang qi field, Immortal's figure was not even as fast as a pheasant, not to mention a flying dragon. He could only watch as Chu Xiu's punch blasted towards him. The murderous aura was sharp, tearing everything apart. At this critical moment, a figure shrouded in a black robe suddenly appeared in front of Immortal and said in a hoarse voice, "Annihilating heaven and destroying earth, annihilating selfless killing punch? Young man, you've killed quite a lot of people. What do you think of this punch of mine?" As soon as he finished speaking, the black-robed man also blasted out a punch. The scarlet murderous aura around him condensed into a vortex, causing heaven and earth to howl and the wind and rain to change. It was actually the same annihilating heaven and destroying earth, annihilating selfless killing punch. As the two fists collided, the murderous aura on Chu Xiu's punch was instantly torn apart by the other party. A powerful force penetrated through his bones, causing Chu Xiu's expression to change. A wave of demonic aura rose around him, even with a wisp of golden light. This was the power that belonged to the nine heavens' demonic golden body. Bursts of demonic aura were heard, and Chu Xiu retreated more than 10 steps before he stopped. There was a hint of fear in his eyes as he looked at the black-robed man. The other party was also a martial Dao master, and he was much stronger than Xiao Liandong, who had died in his hands. The black-robed man looked at Chu Xiu and said with a chuckle, "I've heard about you from Si Ming. Young man, your strength is not bad, but don't be too arrogant. Don't think that you can look down on all martial Dao masters just because you killed a useless master." Yin Batong, who was behind, immediately heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the black-robed man make a move. In fact, before coming here, Yin Batong had not expected Chu Xiu to actually kill him. However, Yin Batong was a veteran of the Jianghu, and he was used to being cautious. After all, Chu Xiu had a reputation in the Jianghu for killing martial Dao masters. Therefore, Yin Batong had used the connections he had accumulated to find a backer. He had originally done this just in case, but he had not expected that this backer would really come in handy. Chu Xiu squinted at the black-robed man and asked, "Who are you?" The black-robed man stood with his hands behind his back and said calmly, "I'm Fang Sha, the second-in-command of the criminal division. Come to think of it, I can be considered your superior. You're also a secret agent of the criminal division." Yin Batong had spent his entire life in the Guanzhong torture room, so his connections were certainly not that simple. In the past, Fang Sha and Yin Batong had both been born at the bottom of the Guanzhong torture room, and they had worked their way up to their current positions. Although they were not life-and-death friends, and there was a huge gap between their current strength, they still had some ties. All these years, as the disciplinary officer, Yin Batong had only begged Fang Sha a few times. Instead, he had always kept in contact with him. This time, Yin Batong had asked Fang Sha for help, and Fang Sha would not refuse. Chu Xiu squinted at Fang Sha. He had heard of this person before. Although Chu Xiu was not a veteran of the Guanzhong torture room, after becoming the disciplinary officer of the Guanzhong torture room, he had learned many secrets about the Guanzhong torture room. The real combat power of the Guanzhong torture room was in the criminal division, and everyone in the Guanzhong torture room knew this. However, one could tell just by looking at the third leader, Si Ming. He was at the peak of the unity of heaven and man realm, and his combat power was extremely strong. Among the 4 disciplinary officers, the only one who could easily defeat Si Ming was the Guangdong disciplinary officer, Xiao Yi. Even with Si Ming's strength, he was only the third leader. One could imagine how strong the second leader and first leader of the criminal division were. Guan Siyu was not the only martial arts grandmaster in the Guanzhong torture room. However, if there came a day when the Guanzhong torture room had to reveal all its strength, then the entire Guanzhong torture room would not be far from being destroyed. Chu Xiu had heard about Fang Sha's background from Mei Qinglian. His background could be considered legendary. He was originally a young lieutenant in the Eastern Qi army, but he was severely injured during a battle with the Northern Yan army and was thrown into a pile of corpses. It was Chu Kuanga who rescued him from the pile of corpses and brought him back to the Guanzhong torture room. After recovering from his injuries, Fang Sha changed his name and joined the criminal division. It was not only to repay a debt of gratitude, but also to seek revenge. It was only later that Fang Sha found out that the reason why he lost the battle with the Northern Yan army was that he was framed during the political struggle in the Eastern Qi imperial court. He was innocent and implicated in it. Therefore, Fang Sha had been staying in the criminal division ever since. His methods were ruthless and cruel. If Si Ming was said to be decisive and merciless, then Fang Sha's methods could be described as cruel. Moreover, after Fang Sha stepped into the martial arts grandmaster realm, he returned to the Eastern Qi alone to seek revenge and annihilated his enemy's entire family. According to Mei Qinglian, this matter had aroused some dissatisfaction from Guan Siyu. However, Guan Siyu did not stop Fang Sha. The criminal division was the Guanzhong torture room's last line of defense. It was also the Guanzhong torture room's most powerful trump card. Although Guan Siyu was the hall leader, her words did not really carry enormous weight. At the very least, Fang Sha and Guan Siyu were of the same generation. It was only because of Chu Kuanga's kindness that he appointed Guan Siyu as the hall leader that he became obedient. However, Fang Sha would not only listen to Guan Siyu's words when it came to certain critical matters. Chu Xiu did not expect Yin Badong to have such a relationship. Looking at Fang Sha, Chu Xiu said calmly, "Leader Fang, this is a personal grudge between Yin Badong and me. You're the leader of the criminal division. Why are you interfering in this matter?" Fang Sha said in a hoarse voice, "Personal grudge? You're all from the Guanzhong torture room. What personal grudge is there? Young man, how long have you been in the Guanzhong torture room? Don't treat the torture room's rules like child's play." Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, "This has nothing to do with how long I've been in the Guanzhong torture room. Some people have been in the Guanzhong torture room their entire lives, but they have achieved nothing. At the very least, I, Chu Xiu, have helped the Guanzhong torture room make a name for itself in the underworld. How can a person who does not do his job be qualified?" When Yin Badong heard this, he immediately became angry. However, he did not continue arguing with Chu Xiu. Yin Badong said to Fang Sha, "Brother Fang, there's no need to talk nonsense with him. Someone broke the Guanzhong torture room's rules. We can't let this matter go. Let's reason with the hall leader." Yin Badong had seen the power of Chu Xiu's punch just now. It was so powerful that it frightened him. When it came to Chu Xiu's strength, Yin Badong had lost the courage to fight him head-on. Moreover, based on his understanding of Fang Sha, their relationship was not to the extent that Fang Sha would teach Chu Xiu a lesson just to help him vent his anger. Yin Badong glanced coldly at Chu Xiu, snorted coldly, and left with Fang Sha. At this time, Tangya walked out and shook his head in disdain. Yin Badong has lived for so long, but in the end, he only knows how to file a complaint. What a disgrace. Chu Xiu said indifferently, "Don't look down on filing a complaint. Sometimes, when the superior is accused too many times, even if you are in the right, it may become unreasonable. There's something called inertia. When someone files a complaint for the first time, the superior won't believe it. But when the second and third time, or a second or third person files a complaint, the superior will definitely think, why did someone have to file a complaint against you and not others? Is there a problem with you too?" When Tangya heard this, he wanted to refute. He had a feeling that Chu Xiu's words were fallacious. However, when he thought about it carefully, Tangya helplessly realized that what Chu Xiu said actually made sense. "Then, sir, what do we do now?" "Wait for Yin Badong to file a complaint?" Tangya asked. Chu Xiu's eyes flickered with an indecipherable light. "Of course we pack up and prepare to wait for the hall leader's summons. I want to see what tricks Yin Badong has up his sleeve this time." Chapter 508. The difference in strength would bring about a change in mentality. This was the case for the current Chu Xiu. In the past, when Chu Xiu was weak, he had to rely on the Guanzhong torture room to ensure his safety. Just like Chen Qingdi's evaluation of Chu Xiu, Chu Xiu's scheming was much deeper than Lu Fengxian's, and he did not have many principles. Therefore, Chu Xiu had chosen a reliable backer early on. At that time, Chu Xiu needed the Guanzhong torture room. Therefore, Chu Xiu had schemed in many ways and joined the Guanzhong torture room as an inspector. But now? Chu Xiu had become the fourth outstanding figure on the Longhu list. He also had the powerful battle power of a grandmaster. For the Guanzhong torture room now, it was no longer Chu Xiu who needed the Guanzhong torture room. It was Guanzhong torture room that needed Chu Xiu. Now, if Chu Xiu wanted to find a capable backer, there were many forces in the underworld who would gladly welcome Chu Xiu. Moreover, Chu Xiu could choose to directly expose his identity of the Devil Dao and completely appear in the underworld as a member of the Immortal lineage. Anyway, there were many ways out for Chu Xiu. If the Guanzhong torture room forced him, the fourth on the Longhu list, out of the Guanzhong torture room, he would really become a laughing stock in the underworld. A few days later, as expected, someone from the torture chamber's headquarters came to invite Chu Xiu to the torture chamber's headquarters. The person who came to invite Chu Xiu was Guan Siyu's disciple, Yuqi. After seeing Chu Xiu, Yuqi cupped his hands and said to Chu Xiu respectfully, "Official Chu, Yin Badong complained about you in front of Master. This matter is not small, so Master wants you to go and settle this matter." Yuqi's attitude toward Chu Xiu was very respectful. He simply regarded Chu Xiu as an existence on the same level as his master, Guan Siyu. Yuqi had always been a person who had a sense of propriety. Although Chu Xiu had joined the Guanzhong torture room at the beginning, Chu Xiu's status was as different as heaven and earth. Perhaps Yin Badong and the others who had been in the Guanzhong torture room for a long time still relied on their seniority to look down on Chu Xiu. However, in the eyes of the younger generation of warriors like Yuqi, Chu Xiu's achievements were absolutely at a level that they had to look up to. Yuqi understood very well that with Chu Xiu's current reputation and status in the underworld, the Guanzhong torture room needed Chu Xiu far more than Chu Xiu needed the Guanzhong torture room. Therefore, from Yuqi's speech just now, Chu Xiu could hear some inclination. Yuqi called Chu Xiu master, but he directly called Yin Badong by his name. This was already very obvious. Chu Xiu smiled and said, "Brother Yuqi, you don't have to do this. You and I are old acquaintances. Wouldn't this make us seem distant?" Yuqi just smiled and didn't say anything. Chu Xiu gave him face because Chu Xiu wasn't arrogant, but he couldn't take it for granted. After giving a few instructions to the Ghost Hand King and the others, Chu Xiu directly followed Yuqi to the torture chamber's headquarters. On the way, Chu Xiu asked, "Brother Yuqi, after Uncle Yin informed me, did Hall Master Guan have any reaction?" Yuqi said, "Master didn't have any reaction. He only said that he was gathering a few torture chamber masters to discuss matters and asked me to invite you over." Hearing Yuqi say this, Chu Xiu immediately had a plan in mind. The key to this matter didn't lie in Chu Xiu's side, but in Guan Siyu's attitude. Moreover, Chu Xiu also saw some other problems in this matter. It seemed that within the Guanzhong torture room, Guan Siyu actually didn't really mean what she said. It was true that the previous hall master, Chu Kuanga, always meant what he said, but compared to Chu Kuanga, Guan Siyu wasn't just lacking in strength and reputation, but also experience. Among the current generation of torture chamber masters, apart from Wei Jiuduan who had already passed away, the other three could be said to be of the same generation as Guan Siyu. Moreover, apart from the few of them, there was also Fang Sha, who was the second in command of the punishment chamber, and the mysterious big leader. In the past, they only listened to Chu Kuanga. Although Guan Siyu had become the hall master, the punishment chamber couldn't possibly listen to Guan Siyu in everything like they did to Chu Kuanga. In fact, Chu Xiu had already sensed this before. The punishment chamber had so many chiefs, but only Si Ming always followed behind Guan Siyu. It was obvious that among these chiefs, only Si Ming was Guan Siyu's true confidant and would listen to Guan Siyu completely. Logically speaking, it was true that Chu Xiu had been overly ruthless in this matter. Chu Xiu was confident because of his current strength and status. As long as he didn't kill Yin Badong on the spot and put Guan Siyu on the spot, the final outcome of this matter would definitely be Guan Siyu punishing both parties. She would tell Yin Badong not to cause trouble, and she would also reprimand Chu Xiu for not abiding by the rules. But now, Yin Badong had found Fang Sha. This was a trump card for Yin Badong, but in Chu Xiu's opinion, this was a foolish move. As the torture chamber master, Yin Badong was Guan Siyu's direct subordinate. Yet, he was now colluding with the second in command of the punishment chamber. What was the meaning of this? Was it because I, Guan Siyu, did things unfairly? Although Chu Xiu wasn't that well-behaved, he had nothing to do with the group of old people in the Guanzhong torture room who had complicated relationships. Chu Xiu would forever be Guan Siyu's subordinate. In this case, Chu Xiu already had a rough idea of how things would develop. After following Yuqi to the Guanzhong torture room, Chu Xiu went straight to the meeting hall. The other torture chamber masters were already there. When Yin Batong saw Chu Xiu, he snorted coldly but didn't say anything. Although Chu Xiu's punch hadn't injured Yin Batong, the news had already spread. Some people even said that if Fang Sha hadn't intervened at the end, Yin Batong would definitely have suffered a huge loss at Chu Xiu's hands. Chu Simo smiled at Chu Xiu and said, "Official Chu, you've made a name for yourself in the pugilistic world this time. You killed a grandmaster and stepped into the 4th place on the Longhu leaderboard. Congratulations." Chu Xiu returned the greeting and said, "Official Chu, you don't have to be so polite. We both have the surname Chu, so it feels awkward addressing each other like this. Official Chu is my senior, so you can just call me by my name." Xiao Yi also chuckled and said, "I heard that you have a good relationship with that kid, Fang Qi Xiao. That kid isn't easy to deal with. It's a good thing you can stand him." Chu Xiu said in surprise, "Lord Xiao, you know Fang Qi Xiao?" Xiao Yi nodded and said, "Don't forget, I'm also from the Forgetting Sword Hut. Back then, when that kid, Fang Qi Xiao, was young, the people of Sword King City often brought him to the other major sword sects to show off. It was called a spar between the younger generation, but it was actually to show off. It's just that although that kid's sword is strong, his mouth is even worse. He was so angry that the disciples of the Forgetting Sword Hut almost fought him to the death, but I stopped them. However, that kid's progress is really terrifying. I'm also old. The junior from back then has now surpassed an old guy like me." Actually, Xiao Yi wasn't that old. His actual age was only around 40, and he was already at the peak of one with heaven. He had the potential to become a martial Dao grandmaster in the future. However, compared to the young geniuses like Fang Qi Xiao and Chu Xiu, Xiao Yi seemed a little mediocre. Chu Xiu smiled and said, "Extraordinary people have extraordinary things. There's nothing wrong with Fang Qi Xiao's current personality. It's better than someone who likes to play tricks in the dark." At this point, Chu Xiu even glanced at Yin Batong. It was obvious that he was hinting that Yin Batong was stirring up trouble while Chu Xiu was not in Guanxi. Also, Lord Xiao, you don't have to belittle yourself. With your strength, it's only a matter of time before you step into the martial Dao Grandmaster realm. Xiao Yi laughed and said, "That's the martial Dao Grandmaster realm. There are so many martial artists in the world, and there are countless who want to step into that realm. However, how many of them can break through this bottleneck? I, Xiao Yi, am not that ambitious. I'm already satisfied that I'm able to preserve this bit of strength." After exchanging some pleasantries with Xiao Yi, Chu Xiu also saw the second-in-command of the Criminal Investigations Division, Fang Sha. However, Fang Sha only sat there and did not say a word. Chu Xiu raised his brows. It seemed like he could tell from the seats that everyone present was divided into two sides. Xiao Yi was neutral, but he had always supported Guan Siyu. Therefore, he sat on the left with Chu Simo. Meanwhile, Fang Sha sat on the right with Yin Batong. However, Fang Sha did not appear to be very close to Yin Batong. After a while, Guan Siyu brought the Criminal Investigations Division's third-in-command, Si Ming, into the conference hall. Si Ming looked at everyone in the hall, but he did not choose to sit next to Fang Sha. Instead, he sat next to Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu secretly raised his brows. It seemed like his previous speculation was right. The Guanzhong torture room was not united, and the Criminal Investigations Division was the same. Looking around at everyone in the hall, Guan Siyu said in a low voice, I believe everyone knows why I've gathered everyone here today. The Guanzhong torture room strictly forbids internal strife. This is the bottom line of the Guanzhong torture room. All these years, the Guanzhong torture room has established a foothold between the three countries. Every step we take can be said to be treading on thin ice. Internal strife, which is a waste of our strength for no reason, is absolutely not allowed to happen. Yin Badong, Chu Xiu, tell me, how should this matter be resolved? Chu Xiu looked indifferent and did not speak, but Yin Badong stood up and cupped his hands at Guan Siyu. Hall Master, Chu Xiu crippled 8 of my Jianghu constables. He is vicious and merciless. He doesn't think of himself as a member of the Guanzhong torture room at all. This fellow is so vicious to his own people. It is obvious what he is thinking. He is probably someone who has made a name for himself in the Jianghu and has grown strong enough to ignore the Guanzhong torture room. I'm afraid he already has disloyalty in his heart. When he said this, even Chu Xiu looked at Yin Badong with a trace of astonishment in his eyes. The older, the wiser. This fellow had fought with Wei Jiuduan in the Guanzhong torture room for such a long time. Other than being narrow-minded, his thoughts were also very sinister. His words directly turned the personal grudge between him and Chu Xiu into Chu Xiu not respecting the Guanzhong torture room and harboring disloyalty. And the crux of the matter was that Yin Badong was not wrong. Chu Xiu really thought so. Chapter 509. Following Yin Badong's words, everyone present turned to look at Chu Xiu. In all these years, although there had been infighting in the Guanzhong torture room, Chu Xiu was the one who had gone overboard. The other Guanzhong torture rooms infighting had been done in secret. Although there had been casualties, they had at least kept up appearances. But what about Chu Xiu? However, he had openly crippled 8 Guannan cultivators in front of everyone. His attitude could be said to be extremely arrogant. Guan Siyu didn't get angry. He just looked at Chu Xiu and said in a deep voice, Chu Xiu, what do you have to say? Chu Xiu knocked on the table, sighing with each knock. He said in an indignant tone, Yin Badong, your words really make one's heart turn cold. If I, Chu Xiu, had any other intentions, would I still be sitting here? Yin Badong, do you know that the most favored 13th Prince Yangchong of the Northern Yan Emperor had personally tried to recruit me and promised me an important position in the court? Yin Badong, do you know that the second Prince Lv Longguang of Eastern Qi, who was even more powerful than the Crown Prince, had promised me to join his army? Yin Badong, do you know that in West Chu, the World Alliance's Chen Qingdi looked favorably upon me? His direct disciple Xie Xiaolu and I were good friends. Eastern Qi, Northern Yan, West Chu, with my current strength and reputation, where can I not go in this big world? The reason I stayed in the Guanzhong torture room is because I, Chu Xiu, know what kindness is. In the past, when I was at my lowest, it was the Guanzhong torture room that took me in. Although I have a bit of reputation now, I don't want to abandon Guanzhong torture room. In the end, you're here spouting nonsense and pestering endlessly for the sake of forcing me to leave. Yin Badong, what sort of intentions do you have? Chu Xiu's words were full of self-righteousness, as if he had been greatly wronged. However, in the end, he didn't say why he had crippled the 8 Guannan cultivators. Yin Badong snorted coldly and said, Chu Xiu, don't try to change the subject here. How do you want to settle the matter of you crippling my 8 subordinates? Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, how? Yin Badong, where were they crippled? In my Guanxi region. Don't you know why a cultivator from your Guannan land came to my Guanxi land? Just as Yin Badong was about to say something, Chu Xiu interrupted, Yin Badong, you don't have to say any more excuses. I don't want to hear them. I crippled 8 of your subordinates, but so what? I'm the Guanxi disciplinary officer. In terms of status, I'm above them. These 8 people didn't respect my superiors. In the long run, the Guanzhong torture room's discipline is bound to be lax. I crippled them now in order to reorganize the Guanzhong torture room's discipline. Isn't that fine? Chu Xiu was clearly twisting words and forcing logic. Yin Batong secretly looked at Guan Siyu, but she was still expressionless and did not make a sound. Seeing this, Yin Batong also got a little anxious and secretly signaled to Fang Sha with his eyes. He did not plan on letting Fang Sha make a move on Chu Xiu. But in this sort of situation, Fang Sha stood on his side and spoke for him. That should be fine, right? Fang Sha coughed when he heard that and said in a hoarse voice, Chu Xiu, even if we want to reorganize discipline, it's not your turn to make a move. You're the Guanxi disciplinary officer, but you came to deal with Guannan people. If this isn't overstepping your bounds, what is? Chu Xiu retorted with a question. Then what should I do? Fang Sha said, naturally report it to the main hall. Chu Xiu sneered and said, what a joke. I, a dignified Guanxi disciplinary officer, actually have to report it to the main hall to deal with a few low-level minor characters. Where's the dignity of a disciplinary officer? Moreover, if we're talking about overstepping your bounds, the one who really overstepped your bounds should be Lord Fang. Lord Fang, you should know what the criminal division does. Why are you here now? Fang Sha's eyes revealed a cold glint. Compared to arguing, he was still more willing to take action. Right then, Guan Siyu suddenly said in a deep voice, all right, all of you shut up. Upon hearing this, everyone present immediately fell silent. Guan Siyu looked at Yin Batong and said in a deep voice, Yin Batong, is your Guannan too idle? You even ran to the Guanxi area to investigate? In the future, it's best that you don't meddle in things that don't belong to you. Yin Batong looked at Guan Siyu in astonishment. He didn't understand why he would suddenly be reprimanded by Guan Siyu. Chu Xiu sneered inwardly. Yin Batong had too many schemes, but he just didn't understand the most critical point. Since he looked for Fang Sha and asked Fang Sha to speak up for him, it meant that Yin Batong was no longer on Guan Siyu's side. It could be said that he had completely offended Guan Siyu. Yin Batong wanted to retort, but he wasn't completely muddle-headed. In the end, he forcefully swallowed his retort. Meanwhile, Guan Siyu turned her gaze to Chu Xiu and snorted coldly. Also, Chu Xiu, you've caused too much trouble outside recently. Do you still think you're outside after returning to the Guanzhong torture room? You'd better stay in the Guanxi area and reflect on your actions. You're not allowed to take a step out of the Guanxi area. After speaking, Guan Siyu waved her hand and said, all right, this matter ends here. You're dismissed. Everyone present had a strange look on their faces. Only Yin Batong's expression was somewhat ugly. Even an idiot could tell that Guan Siyu was actually protecting Chu Xiu this time. It was obvious that Chu Xiu had crippled someone, but Yin Batong had been reprimanded. Although Chu Xiu had also been punished to reflect on his actions, this was nothing to Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu had just stepped into the unity of heaven and man realm. At this time, he needed to go into seclusion to sort out his strength and build a solid foundation. The so-called reflection could be considered seclusion. Anyway, Chu Xiu didn't plan on going out again. After everyone left, Chu Xiu hadn't left the main hall. At this time, Yuqi suddenly walked out and said in a low voice, Official Chu, Master wants you to go over. Chu Xiu nodded in understanding and followed Yuqi to Guan Siyu's study. At the moment, Guan Siyu's face was expressionless. It was as if she hadn't been the one reprimanding Yin Batong and Chu Xiu. As she looked at Chu Xiu, Guan Siyu suddenly sighed and said, Do you understand what happened before? Guan Siyu's words were somewhat unclear, but Chu Xiu nodded and said, I understand. It seems that in the entire criminal division, besides third leader Si Ming, the other two leaders don't seem to respect you, Hall Master. Guan Siyu sighed again and said, Ever since I took over the position of Hall Master, I've been trembling with fear and trepidation. In the end, I developed the Guanzhong torture room to this stage. Unfortunately, to some people, I'm actually very lucky to be in this position. In the past, when Guan Siyu took over the Guanzhong torture room, it couldn't be said that he was lucky. It could only be said that Chu Kuanga had a good eye for talent. However, at that time, Guan Siyu didn't have the greatest authority in the Guanzhong torture room, but Chu Kuanga chose Guan Siyu to become hall master. This was very puzzling. However, in the end, Guan Siyu succeeded and successfully developed the Guanzhong torture room to this stage. This puzzling turned into recognition. Unfortunately, in the Guanzhong torture room, there were still people who didn't recognize Guan Siyu. Not to mention these people's strength, just based on qualifications, they weren't inferior to Guan Siyu's. Chu Xiu said in a low voice, in order for the Guanzhong torture room to reach its current scale, besides Chu Juxia's good foundation, it also couldn't do without Hall Master's help. Some people just don't know how to appreciate favors. They need to be taught a lesson from time to time. Guan Siyu narrowed his eyes and said, I've already taught them a lesson. There's no need for a second time. Chu Xiu, you went from being a wanted person to becoming the Guanxi torture room's current Guanxi torture room. The Guanzhong torture room can give you many things. I just hope that you won't betray the torture room. This is the lightest punishment I can give you. If you do it again, you'll be punished severely. After hearing this, Chu Xiu lowered his head and walked out. Guan Siyu had just said that some people needed to be taught a lesson, but in the blink of an eye, Chu Xiu was taught a lesson. In fact, Chu Xiu's behavior this time was somewhat against the rules. He relied on sophistry. Guan Siyu could stand on his side completely because Yin Batong was muddle-headed and actually joined forces with the people from the Criminal Investigation Division. After leaving Guan Siyu's place, Chu Xiu planned to directly return to Guanxi. He did not expect Mei Qinglian to walk out from the small path with a smile on her beautiful face. You came to the main hall once, yet you don't plan on coming to see me? Chu Xiu, you really have no conscience. Chu Xiu said with a bitter smile, Madam, if I came to see you, I'm afraid it would be inappropriate. I just came out of Hall Master Guan's place. Mei Qinglian waved her hand and said, Come with me. Don't worry. Guan Siyu is very worried right now, so she doesn't have time to care about you. Hearing Mei Qinglian say this, Chu Xiu directly followed Mei Qinglian to her room. After closing the door, Mei Qinglian chuckled and said, You've made quite a name for yourself in West Chu this time. You even killed a martial arts grandmaster. Chu Xiu shook his head and said, Madam Saintess, you don't have to make fun of me. You know my strength. The martial arts master I killed was only a weak rogue cultivator, and I had to use some tricks to kill him. If I encounter a real martial arts master, I can only choose to escape. Mei Qinglian waved her hand and said, You don't have to be overly modest. With your current strength, you can already stand shoulder to shoulder with Zhong Xian and Zhang Chengzhen. My Yinma bloodline is lucky to have you among the younger generation. Otherwise, no one would be able to compete with Zhong Xian and Zhang Chengzhen. That little girl from the moon-worshipping cult is very mysterious. Moreover, she is from the bright demon bloodline, so she can't represent my Yinma bloodline. Chu Xiu nodded and said, That's right, Madam Saintess, Guan Siyu still can't completely control the Guanzhong torture room. Is it because of those people from the criminal division? Mei Qinglian snorted and said, What else do you think? I can deal with Guan Siyu, but I can't deal with others. If it weren't for those annoying guys, the Guanzhong torture room would have become a secret branch of my Yinma bloodline. Would I still need to be so careful? Chapter 510. Mei Qinglian had stayed in the Guanzhong torture room for a long time. Her understanding of the Guanzhong torture room was naturally much deeper than Chu Xiu's. There was no need to explain why a Yin demon sect saintess was lurking in the Guanzhong torture room. The reason why Mei Qinglian had not succeeded all this time was not because of Guan Siyu, but because of the two leaders of the punishment department and the other people from the punishment department. The reason for this was not because Guan Siyu was not strong enough, but because Guan Siyu had been too hasty when he took over the Guanzhong torture room. In fact, Chu Kuanga had already decided to help Guan Siyu to the position of hall master. It was just that Chu Kuanga's death was too hasty. If Chu Kuanga had enough time to help Guan Siyu establish her prestige, then so many things would not have happened. Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, "Saintess, since the two people from the punishment department are so troublesome, why don't you think of a way to get rid of them? With the Yinma clan's strength, it shouldn't be difficult to get rid of them, right? If the Yinma clan could really control the Guanzhong torture room, Chu Xiu would not need to be so secretive." Mei Qinglian glanced at Chu Xiu and said with slight surprise, "You're quite vicious. You're prepared to kill right from the start." "It's not that I can't do that, but I want a complete Guanzhong torture room, not a broken Guanzhong torture room." Although Guan Siyu would listen to me on some matters, he wasn't my puppet. He was only dissatisfied that the criminal investigation department didn't listen to his orders. He didn't want to ruthlessly eliminate the true trump card of the Guanzhong disciplinary hall, the criminal investigation department. Once I do that, Guan Siyu will definitely sense that something is wrong. What should I do then? He even killed Guan Siyu? Chu Xiu nodded, but he did not agree with Mei Qinglian's view. There was no construction without destruction. It was impossible for the Yinma clan to hide in the dark forever. If they wanted more power, they had to use extraordinary means. After chatting with Mei Qinglian for a while, Chu Xiu did not stay any longer. He directly left the headquarters and returned to the Guanxi land to cultivate. He didn't know when it started, but Chu Xiu had become accustomed to considering everything from the perspective of the demonic path. It wasn't because Chu Xiu, the fake inheritor of the Kunlun devil cult, was so loyal to the Yinma bloodline, but because Chu Xiu discovered that in his current situation, the identity of the Yinma bloodline was much more useful than his current identity, and he could be unscrupulous. After returning to Guanxi, Chu Xiu immediately entered seclusion. One reason was to stabilize his current realm, and the other was to cultivate the Nine Heavens Fiend golden body to match his current cultivation. While Chu Xiu was in seclusion, a huge stronghold stood in the dense forest of the northern Yan's Liaodong County. The entire stronghold was covered in white snow, and it would be impossible to find it unless one went deep into the forest. At that moment, there was a circle of chairs in the stronghold's lobby. Two bold words hung on the top of the lobby, Qilian. Right below the two words Qilian, a burly man sat on a chair made of white tiger skin with a gloomy expression on his face. The burly man was tall and sturdy. His exposed muscles seemed to be cast from steel. The most peculiar thing about him was his appearance, which was actually crimson. At that moment, the burly man looked at the people below and said in a deep voice, "Tell me, how many have we lost during this period of time?" A skinny cultivator smiled bitterly and said, "First leader, within a month, all 7 of our strongholds were destroyed. Our brothers suffered heavy casualties. If we can't do it, we can only ask our brothers to retreat." At that moment, another tall warrior stood up and shouted, "Lin Mingtong, what did you say? Withdraw? It wasn't easy for us to solve the problem of the Northern Yan Imperial Court through the 13th Prince Xiang Chong, and let the stronghold walk out of the Liaodong forest. Now you want us to withdraw? Won't our efforts be in vain?" Lin Mingtong frowned and said, "What else are you going to do? Fight?" The righteous manor joined forces with more than 10 sects in eastern Yen to suppress our Qilian stronghold. If we don't withdraw our forces, we can only be defeated one by one. The 36 bandits of the northern land are already in the past. Now, only our Qilian stronghold still exists. If we continue to fight with them, we have no chance of winning. The warrior retorted, "The righteous manor's goal is to force our Qilian stronghold into the Liaodong forest. In the end, they even want to force us out of the northern Yen, or even kill us in one fell swoop. If we take a step back, they will take a step forward. In the end, our Chilean stronghold will have no way to retreat. What are you afraid of? At worst, we will perish together with the righteous manner and fight to the death. Lin Mingtong sneered and said, Hejan, wake up. We are no longer the 36 bandits of the northern land. What do we have to perish together with them and fight to the death? I'm afraid that in the end, the fish will die, but their net will not be broken. The group of people below was making a ruckus. The red-faced strong man sitting on the main seat suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. His originally red face was now slightly pale. The people who were still making a ruckus suddenly panicked and hurriedly shouted, First Master. The red-faced strong man waved his hand and sneered, It's all right. Stone General, Han Baxian's strength is indeed not for show. The power of the Haoyang Nine Extremes mysterious art is not inferior to that of the Great Light Temple's bald donkeys. However, Han Baxian was also hit by my flaming divine palm, so he did not feel good either. Which hypocrite of the righteous manner, Nie Renlong, did not dare to make a move, but Han Baxian made a move first. But it's all right. Even if the two of them were to attack together, I am not afraid. In the past, I, Pang Hu, had withstood the imperial court and the northern fluttering snow city. If they want to kill me now, it will not be that easy. This red-faced strong man was none other than the last survivor of the 36 bandits of the northern land, the master of the Chilean Iron Cavalry, red-faced Heavenly King, Pang Hu. In the past, when Chu Xiu was in Wei County, he had dealt with the red-faced Heavenly King Pang Hu's subordinates, Han Bao and the others. He had also borrowed the strength of Han Bao and the others. However, after Chu Xiu had left Wei County, he had already revealed Pang Hu's location to Han Bao and the others, and instructed them to look for Pang Hu. However, it seemed that the plot had deviated. Pang Hu's Chilean stockade was now in conflict with the righteous manner, and from the looks of it, they were forced to the extreme. Looking at the people below, Pang Hu wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and said in a low voice, There's no other way. For the time being, recall the people from the other stockades. However, leave some people outside to keep an eye on the righteous manner's movements. Be careful. Hejan was slightly unwilling, First Master, are we going to have to give in? Pang Hu snorted coldly, Of course this matter is not over. However, with just the strength of the Chilean stockade, we can only fight the righteous manner head-on. The outcome is that our chances of winning are not high. You are all my old brothers who have followed me for decades. Naturally, I will not let you die with me. Hejan and the others immediately said, First Master, when have we, the Chilean Iron Cavalry, ever been afraid of death? In the past, we even dared to go against the Northern Yen Imperial Court, let alone the righteous manner. Pang Hu waved his hand and said, All right, you are not afraid of death, but I do not want to die with you. I have never begged anyone in my life, but now, I can only ask for help. Hejan was stunned, Beg who? Pang Hu's expression was a little ugly. After hesitating for a while, he said, I beg a woman from the Yinma clan. Pang Hu was conflicted because he wanted to beg a woman. However, the people below were concerned that the First Master actually wanted to beg someone from the demonic Dao. They really did not know that the First Master actually had such an important relationship with the demonic Dao. Lin Mutong said hesitantly, First Master, as far as I know, the Yinma clan is not having it easy either. They are being chased by the righteous sects, and their relationship with the bright demons is not good. If we are related to them, will we attract trouble? Although the Northern 36 bandits did not have a good reputation, that was only a matter of the Northern Yen Imperial Court. In other places, they did not care who the Northern 36 bandits were. As for the Yinma clan, they were ostracized by the entire Jianghu. Pang Hu snorted lightly, Our Chilean stockade is already at the point of life and death. How can we care so much? Regardless of whether they are from the demonic Dao or the evil Dao, I am already prepared to throw away my pride and beg for help. Are you still not willing?" Hearing Pang Hu's words, the others did not say a word. In the past, during the era of the Northern 36 Bandits, Pang Hu was not the strongest among the 36 bandits. However, his character was the most stubborn one. Indeed, he had never begged for help. "Han Bao, this time, you will make the trip." Following Pang Hu's words, Han Bao stood up and said respectfully, "Yes, leader." At this time, Han Bao already had the cultivation of the three-flower realm. For a talent like him, it was already somewhat incredible. In the past, Han Bao was Pang Hu's personal guard. After he joined forces with Chu Xiu, Han Bao earned a lot of gold and silver resources from Shangmang Mountain. Originally, he could have continued to dominate Shangmang Mountain. However, he was loyal to Pang Hu and traveled thousands of miles to bring things to Pang Hu. This made Pang Hu quite touched. Therefore, among Pang Hu's subordinates, Han Bao's strength was not as good as Lin Mutong, He Zhan, and the others. However, he was the most trustworthy one. After sending the others away, Pang Hu handed a letter to Han Bao and said, "Go to the Guanzhong torture room and give this letter to Guan Siyu's wife, Mei Qinglian. Tell her whatever she asks you. There is no need to hide anything from her. Tell her that as long as she helps our Qilian stockade solve the crisis this time, if her hidden devil clan needs us in the future, our Qilian stockade will go through fire and water without hesitation." When he mentioned that Mei Qinglian was Guan Siyu's wife, Pang Hu suddenly paused. His tone became a little strange, as if he had eaten a fly. Han Bao was a little curious and wanted to ask something, but he was stopped by Pang Hu's glare. "If I ask you to go, just go. Why are you asking so many questions?" Chapter 5:11. A month later, in the backyard of the Guanzhong torture room, Han Bao stood there trembling with fear. He did not dare to look at the woman in front of him. Previously, Han Bao had wanted to ask Pang Hu why he had sought help from the demonic path, but in the end, he had come to find Guan Siyu's wife. But when he saw Mei Qinglian, Han Bao realized how terrifying this woman in front of him was. She was so beautiful that he did not dare to look at her directly. Similarly, her strong aura did not let Han Bao have any improper thoughts. This woman was like a poisonous rose. She looked gorgeous, but as long as you touched her lightly, the poison would be able to kill you without leaving even your bones. Holding the letter written by Pang Hu, Mei Qinglian smiled and shook her head. "Pang Hu, that big fool, is still so stubborn. I told him before that the 36 bandits of the northern land have no future. If you want to go against the imperial court, you have to find a way to do it. Just like the 36 bandits of the northern land. If the imperial court does not destroy them, who else would they destroy? Now that you are struggling at death's door and have preserved some of your strength, why are you going against the moored village?" Although Han Bao was very dissatisfied with Mei Qinglian's description of them as struggling at death, he thought of Pang Hu's previous instructions. Han Bao could only say obediently, "This time, it really wasn't our Qilian stockade village that started the trouble. After the 36 bandits of the northern land were destroyed, Qilian village has nothing to do with them. This time, it was the moored village who initiated the trouble. They even united more than 10 aristocratic families of the northern Yan and formed the moored village alliance to kill Qilian village. The head of the moored village, Nye Renlong, pretended to be benevolent and was despicable. He was not confident that he could defeat the first master in a one-on-one fight. He even asked the northern Yan martial arts tycoon, Stone General, Han Ba to fight first. The great leader fought with Han Ba and both of them suffered some injuries. The great leader really couldn't hold on any longer, so he sent me to ask the Hidden Devil clan for help. As long as the Yinma clan helps Qilian stockade village to overcome this crisis, if the Yinma clan needs anything in the future, Qilian stockade village will not hesitate to go through water and tread on fire. Mei Qinglian chuckled. Suddenly, like a flower blooming, the whole room seemed to be brighter. However, Han Bao still did not dare to look at Mei Qinglian. Instead, he lowered his head even more. Why is Pang Hu acting so serious? We're old acquaintances. How can I ignore him when he's begging me? Alright, you can wait here for a few days. I will find you a reliable person to ensure that your Qilian stockade village can survive this crisis. Han Bao heaved a sigh of relief when he heard what Mei Qinglian said. However, he was also curious about the relationship between the first leader and Madame Guan. Both parties seemed to have a past. Although Han Bao was gossipy, he did not dare to think that Pang Hu and Mei Qinglian had an old relationship. Although Han Bao still admired the first leader, after meeting Mei Qinglian, he knew that a woman like Mei Qinglian could not be tamed by an ordinary man. It was the same for his first leader, Pang Hu. In the Guanxi Punishment Hall, where Chu Xiu was cultivating in seclusion. At this moment, Chu Xiu's upper body was naked. His entire body was enveloped in boundless devil qi. The devil qi was extremely pure, but at this moment, the devil qi had turned into needles and seeped into Chu Xiu's body. It cleansed all of Chu Xiu's meridians and all of his qi and blood. When the devil qi refined his body, the intense pain was like a death by 1,000 cuts. It penetrated deep into his bones. Even though Chu Xiu's mental strength was strong, he could not shield himself from the pain. He could only endure it. Chu Xiu's body was trembling slightly. Sweat flowed out from his pores like water. There was even a trace of blood mixed in it. However, he endured it and did not make a sound. After all, the soundproofing of the seclusion was not very good. If Chu Xiu made any sound inside, people outside might think that Chu Xiu was doing something strange while cultivating in seclusion. At this moment, a black mist rose from the seclusion. Mei Qinglian's figure walked out of it. She looked at Chu Xiu with interest, who was cultivating the 9 heavens demonic golden body. Chu Xiu had already sensed that Mei Qinglian was the moment she appeared. Therefore, Chu Xiu was not nervous. He just cultivated step by step. After completing this stage of refining his body, Chu Xiu withdrew the devil qi around his body. Seeing that Mei Qinglian was still staring at him, Chu Xiu picked up the clothes beside him and put them on. He was a little speechless. Saintess, can you tell me the next time you appear? Don't appear and disappear so mysteriously. Let me be mentally prepared. Mei Qinglian snorted and said, "You are cultivating in bed, not playing with women in bed. Why do you need to be mentally prepared?" Chu Xiu smiled bitterly. How could he reply to Mei Qinglian's tough words? Just now, you cultivated Marquis Lu Wenho's 9 heavens demonic golden body? Mei Qinglian asked curiously. Chu Xiu nodded. Mei Qinglian shook her head and said, "This cultivation method's conditions are too harsh. With your physique, you can cultivate it. However, if it were someone else, I'm afraid that they would easily waste themselves. Although this cultivation method is called the 9 transformations, it is the lowest among the 9 transformations. There are only a few who can cultivate it to the peak." Chu Xiu smiled and said, "In this world, there is no strongest cultivation method. There are only the strongest people. In fact, it is unreasonable to evaluate cultivation methods according to their grades. Some people can reach the peak by relying on a first revolution cultivation method. Some people even have a 9 transformations cultivation method, but they are still trash. So in my opinion, any cultivation method can't be judged by its grade, but by the person who cultivates it." Mei Qinglian looked at Chu Xiu in surprise. She didn't expect that Chu Xiu actually had his own views on martial arts, and what he said was very reasonable. Martial Dao Grand Master was actually an honorific title in the beginning, not referring to strength. However, for most martial artists, they only had their own views on martial arts after stepping into the real pellet state, so slowly, Martial Dao Grand Master became another title for the real pellet state. So under the real pellet state, as long as you have a unique view on martial arts, you can actually be regarded as a Martial Dao Grand Master. Chu Xiu also asked Mei Qinglian at this time, Madam Saint came to me, is there something wrong with the Yinma clan? Mei Qinglian shook her head and said, it's not about the Yinma clan, but some of my own private matters. I want to ask you for help. With that said, Mei Qinglian told Chu Xiu about Qilian village. Finally, Mei Qinglian said, Pang Hu is my old friend. He is now asking me for help, but I can't turn a blind eye to it. But I can't leave here, so I can only let you make this trip. Facing the Morgue Manor, what Pang Hu and the others lack is actually not strength, but brains. If those bandits who only know how to fight all day to face the Morgue Manor alliance, they will be killed sooner or later. If you help them with the layout, they will probably be in a different situation. And I seem to have heard that you also have a lot of hatred with the Morgue Manor alliance. This time, you can also teach the people of the Morgue Manor a lesson. After you come back, there will be a lot of rewards on my side. After listening to Mei Qinglian's words, Chu Xiu's eyes showed a trace of a strange look. When he tricked Han Bao into looking for Pang Hu, he was actually just using Han Bao. He did not expect that there would be a day where he could continue to deal with Pang Hu. In fact, Chu Xiu had almost forgotten about Pang Hu. And now, the development of Qilian village was also very different from the original plot. In the original plot, Pang Hu led his Qilian iron cavalry in the dense forest of Liaodong to recuperate. When they were strong enough, they began to come out of the mountains again and looted the land of Liaodong in northern Yan. This caused a lot of trouble for the northern Yan imperial court. In the end, a large number of forces were sent to suppress them. And now, no one knew what had affected Pang Hu. He was not as savage as in the original plot. He just obediently recuperated in the dense forest of Liaodong and steadily developed his forces. Step by step, he built a branch. He even reached a reconciliation with the northern Yan imperial court through his relationship with the 13th prince, Xiang Chong. However, maybe even God did not want Pang Hu's men to have a good time. The Morgue Manor actually joined forces with more than 10 forces to enter Liaodong. They wanted to completely destroy Qilian village and had almost pushed Pang Hu to the limit. And in the original plot, Chu Xiu did not remember that the Morgue Manor had once formed an alliance. Now it seemed that there was a deviation in the plot. Chu Xiu thought for a while and said in a low voice, Saintess, this is not a good task. The Morgue Manor has a grudge with me, that's true, but there are 2 Martial Dao Grandmasters in the Morgue Manor. Qilian village is also being suppressed by them. What can I do if I go alone? If I want to reverse the situation, it will be extremely difficult. Mei Qinglian rolled her eyes and said, if it was easy, would I still come to you? Don't think that this is a hard task. The benefits you can get after this will be beyond your imagination. You don't know Pang Hu's character. He rarely asks for help and hates owing favors. If you help him this time, Pang Hu will feel that he owes you a favor for a lifetime. As long as you don't deliberately send him to his death, if you need Pang Hu's help in the future, he will definitely not refuse. The power of the Qilian iron cavalry is also extraordinary. They were the existence that could fight against the 5 armies of the northern Yan kingdom. They are definitely stronger than you think. Chu Xiu moved his body and revealed a thoughtful look in his eyes. Now, Chu Xiu was no longer the demonic junior, who could only obey orders. With Chu Xiu's strength and ability, he had the right to refuse and also the right to negotiate, even if the other party was Mei Qinglian, the saintess of the Shadow Demon sect. So now, Chu Xiu was only thinking about the benefits of this matter and whether it was worth it for him to take action. You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.